Hey guys. You are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Deku had a quirk that summoned powerful weapons. Here is short summary. When Izuku Midoriya first activated his quirk, it was to save his best friend was falling into a river. His quirk was the ability to summon various weapons with a unique power associated to each of his weapons, the perfect quirk for a hero. Unfortunately, someone took notice of the boy, and tried to turn him into something he wasn't. This is how Izuku Midoriya rose up and became a hero. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. It appears that young Midoriya here does indeed have a quirk. An emitter type from what we can gather, although there is no way of telling what his quirk would end up being. Based on the information, it will be radically different from yours. What is his father's quirk, Miss Midoriya? A doctor asked with thick heavy glasses and a mustache most 80s villains would envy. A woman with long green hair nervously fiddled her fingers together, looking at her son that had somehow changed his pupils into stars. His father had a fire-breathing quirk, she said solemnly, her eyes falling slightly at the mention of her late husband. He was the pro-hero Fire Charge, I'm sure you might remember him. She finished, rubbing her son's back to snap him out of his trance. The doctor's eyes fell slightly. Oh, I'm sorry, I heard about his death. But my statement still stands, young Izuku's quirk will be both radically different from either of your quirks, although looking at the information again, I am noticing a mutation in his brain. He began, instantly noticing the mother's worry. He began to clarify. Don't worry, it's nothing harmful, in fact it's quite the opposite. In all telekinetic users, they have an extra gland in their brain, allowing them an easier access to using their quirks. The same can be said about your son. No, he doesn't have a telekinetic quirk, however the gland will give him an easier time with his quirk when it eventually manifests. He said, cutting the woman off as she was about to ask a question. I have a quirk, the small boy known as Izuku Midoriya yelled, swinging his plastic miniature cough action figure cough of All Might high into the air, the toy saying its iconic catchphrase of, I am here. I'm gonna be a hero like All Might Mama, and save everyone with a smile on my face. The boy then stood in the iconic hands on hips position, and have his brightest smile as the doctor put on a pair of sunglasses over his glasses. So bite. The doctor thought as he attempted to shield his eyes from the oncoming sun rays that threatened to blind the man. To the man's amazement, he saw the mother merely tanking the attack, as if she was used to the effect of the sun. Yes, I'm sure you will have a great quirk, sonny. Now, if you two would kindly leave, I have another appointment waiting for me. The two greenettes then left as the doctor spoke for one last time, and be sure to come back when his quirk manifests. The doctor watched as the two left, before a small smile crept upon the man's face, before pressing a button and the room he was in suddenly dimmed, locking himself away from the outside world. He held the folder of the boy in his hands as he made a call. It rang for exactly 21 seconds before a dark voice finally answered. Doctor. The voice was full of power and fear, and the doctor felt a chill down his spine as he began to speak. Master. I have a boy here that might prove useful to you. The doctor said, silently fist bumping himself that he didn't stutter. Oh, was all the man said, a slight hint of curiosity in his voice as he no doubt raised an eyebrow over the call. Yes, master. I just finished with him. His quirk factor was off the charts. I couldn't even find out what his quirk truly was, only that it was a mutation with an emitter aspect as well. The doctor replied, adjusting his glasses as he awaited his master's answer. Keep an eye on the boy, good doctor, and alert me to any developments to him. It's possible that this boy may be the answer to all of our troubles. The man said as the call cut off, leaving the doctor alone to his machinations. The doctor put away the file as he typed the boy information into his computer. Finishing his work, he grabbed another file that had a picture of a small blonde girl with spiky blonde hair pulled back into a ponytail. Please bring in the Bakugos. The man said over the intercom, watching as the family entered his office, then beginning her tests. Time skip. 6 months. Green curly hair was flowing in the breeze that the wind had gracefully provided him, his bright emerald eyes shining like stars as he watched in amazement as his best friend since forever was using her quirk. Katsumi Bakugo, The two had known each other since the day they were born. Loud sparks flew through the air as everyone sang praises to the girl. A large smile on her face as she walked over to the boy. "Ha! Beat you, Zuzu. I manifested mine before yours," she yelled in triumph, raising her fist into the air as she struck a pose. "Why yeah. You did. And it's a awesome kachan," he yelled back, jumping on his feet slightly as he sang the girl praises. The girl hid her face slightly as she felt her face heat up. For some reason, whenever he sang her praises, it felt different from everyone else. She shook her head slightly, her face returning to normal as she smirked. "So when are you gonna finally get yours, Zuzu? All these other extras keep saying that I need to distance myself from you, and if you don't get your quirk soon, maybe I should start listening to them," she said as she crossed her arms, smirking as she watched his expression change from amazed to confused, then frightened. "See, come on, Kachan. Why, you know I can't control when I finally have my Q quirk." She shook her head slightly, before coming closer and whispered in his ear, "Hee, I know, but it's so fun to tease you." She then turned around and hid her small blush, before putting her attention back to the crowd that was confused by the exchange between friends. His face a bright crimson as she turned around, eternally grateful that she couldn't see how affected he always was from her teasing. Unknown to the two of them, under his clothes something strange was occurring. Y'all nasty for thinking something lewd. On his arms and legs yellow stripes began to appear, 2 on his arms, and 1 on his thighs. "Come on, you extras, we're going to the log," the blonde shouted as she began her march to her and Izuku's favorite spot to relax. The place was past the fences and deep inside the woods, a place the two found together one day they were exploring. The extras cheered in agreement as they marched behind the beat of Katsumi, her hands sparking as she led the way towards the log. Izuku's smile was bright as he picked up his pace, matching Katsumi as he stopped right beside her. The two 6-year-olds were partners in a sense, best friends for as long as they could remember, especially since the two had known each other since birth. Together they promised that they would be the greatest hero duo in the world, and now all they had to do was wait until Izuku finally manifested his quirk, then they could begin to train. The group of 8 finally made their way to the log, the blonde leading the charge as she took a step forward onto the mossy log. "Wait, Kachan. Be careful, it's a lot more slippery than last time," Izuku suddenly yelled out, his analytical mind noticing the new patches of moss that formed since their last adventure. The extras chuckled as Midoriya's words, "Kachan won't slip, she's too awesome." Her eye twitched involuntarily at the extras' comments. 1. Don't call me Kachan. And 2. The extras right, Zuzu. "There's no way I'm gonna slip," she yelled back in her usual bravado, taking one step in front of the other as she stomped on the log. In comedic irony, that's exactly when her body decided this was the opportune moment to prove Izuku right. Her feet slipped underneath her and she fell face first into the water stream below. His body moved before he could even blink, his only thought trying to get to Kachan before she hurt herself. His arm was stretched outwards as he tried to reach for her, his eyes glowed a bright blue as the new stripes on his body illuminated the same color. An astral image of a sword was made in his hand as he clenched his fist. Instinctively slashing downwards, a blue portal appeared before him as he ran through. What just happened? She didn't know when she started to scream. She knew that the fall wasn't far, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. In another life she might have just hit the bottom and be totally fine, but in this life something else happened. Right before her eyes she saw a wisp of blue, before a large circle of bright blue appeared right before her, and in the blink of an eye, both her and the portal were gone. She felt her body hit something soft before it hit hard against the hard wood planks that made up her home floor. Dazed, she looked up to see her parents gaping at her like a fish. She shook her head and looked to the side, only to see her best friend right beside her rubbing his head. "Zuzu?" she asked, her red eyes looking at him curiously as she absent-mindedly rubbed her elbows. His eyes lit up in an instant, realizing that he was holding something in his hand. Looking down, he saw him holding onto a blue hilt of a katana, its blue shine glinting in his now blue eyes. In a flash the katana disappeared, his eyes returning to their normal emerald green as his smile nearly blinded the Bakugo household. "I got it, I got my quirk." A man wearing a goofy hat holding a sign that says, "Time skip, doctor's office." "Well, It appears that young Izuku here's quirk allows him to create these twin katanas, similar to what is on the screen. The doctor began, a photo of martial arts weapons appearing on his handheld device. But that's not all. It appears while using these katanas, it allows him to create portals, which classifies his quirk as a warp type, at least it would if that was all his quirk allowed him to do. The doctor said, slowly taking a sip of something as he let the suspense build for the dramatic reveal. I'm sorry, but what is his quirk? The mother asked, holding her son in her arms as he tried to wrestle his way free. The doctor smiled. After his quirk activated, we were able to get more information on his quirk factor. This is a scan of someone who has a quirk that allows his body to harden. His quirk factor is pure red. The doctor said as he showed a red sphere on his tablet. This one is even more unique. The owner of the quirk has two sides, red and blue. His quirk allows him to produce both fire and ice. But this is young Izuku's quirk. The screen then changes to show a large sphere with 4 colors connecting to a small green center, blue, red, purple and orange spiraled around the multicolored core, connecting at points where all 4 colors connected, creating a bright emerald. It appears that young Izuku has multiple factors to his quirk. His quirk allows him create 4 different weapons that originate from the ninjitsu period from the early 1800s. Mrs. Midoriya, it's quite possible that your son has one of the most powerful quirks to ever originate since All Might's himself. The doctor finished, adjusting his glasses as he allowed the woman to think. I'm sorry, could you repeat what his quirk actually does? It sounds like it just allows him to create weapons. What makes that so special? She asked, the resistance to hold her son now stopping as he stopped resting against his mother's arms, now fully paying attention to the man's words. Yes, however, from what I've gathered from the information you gave me, it appears that while using these weapons, they will give young Izuku a unique ability. The katanas he managed to make allowed him to create portals. I have no doubt that's whatever other weapon he might create will do something else for the boy. Perhaps one might even give him strength to rival All Might. I'm gonna be as strong as All Might? The boy cut in, his emerald eyes now wide with excitement as he managed to escape his mother's grasp. It's his possibility, young one. Now, before I write down this new information, do you have any more questions, Miss Midoriya? The doctor asked, grabbing his tablet while he spoke. Yes, right after he first blipped, I noticed that he now has some weird patterns on his arms, the woman said, asking her son to remove his shirt to show the man his new stripes. The boy followed his mother's request, exposing his arms to the doctor. I see, and do you have any more of these stripes on your body? The doctor asked after studying the yellow stripes for a moment. The boy nodded. I have one of my legs too. I see, well, it appears your boy is full of surprises, Miss Midoriya. Your son's quirk isn't an emitter, but actually a mutation type with emitter capabilities. Quite rare. Could you try to summon the blade like before? The doctor asked, getting a nod from the boy as he closed his eyes. Small sparks of blue flickered between the boy's fingers, his eyes gaining the blue pupils like before, the stripes on his arms now beginning its glow as it increased in brightness. A ghost image of a katana began to form in the boy's grasp, before suddenly flickering out of existence as the boy had a line of sweat run down his face as he panted. As I thought, these stripes allow his quirk to use excess energy and redirect it, completely harmless for the boy. He finished, writing down some information before looking back at the boy. Now, what do you want to call this quirk? The boy thought for a moment, before smiling brightly as he shouted. Ninjitsu Arsenal. Time skip brought to you by an unwilling dog in a suit. 10 years later, New York City. The sun shone through the curtains that covered the window in the small apartment that sat in the middle of New York. A groan being heard as the blankets covering a bed moved as a bush of green hair poked through. His emerald eyes opened to look at the alarm clock that dared to interrupt his very important business, sleeping. With a loud sigh he pushed himself upwards, sitting on his bed as he rolled his back, the loud pops being enough to fully wake him up for the meantime. As he got up his eyes drifted to his small desk that was currently littered with various papers and ninja stars, his eyes setting on the 2 picture frames that also sat on his desk. The first showed a much younger him with eyes as bright as the sun, and a girl who was taller than him with a fiery gaze in her ruby eyes. A small smile crept on his face as he remembered the good times. His eyes then drew to the other picture, one of him and a woman who looked eerily similar to him, long green hair and the same emerald eyes, holding him close as they both had huge smiles on their faces. He ran a finger against the two pictures. "I promise, he'll pay for what all he did, Mom. And I promise, you'll see me soon, Kachan," he said as he opened the door to his room, entering the small kitchen and prepared a bowl of cereal, the classiest of breakfast foods. He finished quickly as he grabbed a pair of headphones and his skateboard that hung on the wall right beside his door. With a flash of blue, a portal opened right before him. Tossing his skateboard through, he slung his backpack against his shoulder as he jumped through. The sensation of wind flowing through his face as he felt his feet land on his board, his eyes widening as they adjusted to the outside world that currently made up New York City. Grabbing his phone, he began blasting music into his headphones as he began his ride through the streets of New York. Growing up in shadows, with a slam of his heel he sent him and the board high onto the air, jumping over a curb and landing on the sidewalk. New York City underground, uncovering their power that's been hiding all around. His jacket was flowing as he pressed on and pushed his feet from the ground, gaining momentum, jumping as he slid across a railing that separated him from his destination. The city needs heroes when the trouble on the prowl. In the corner of his eye he saw a car ignoring the street signs and barreling right towards him in the middle of the street. He bent his knees as he jumped higher than the car, his board spying underneath the car and landing right beneath his feet as he flipped off the car. 4 bothers from the sewers rise to take the villains out. His board skittered to a stop as his gaze settled upon a local newspaper stand and began reading the headlines. Rise of TH, "Hey kid, you gonna buy something or what?" the man asked in a thick New Yorker's accent, gaining the boy's attention as he pulled off his headphones, the music dying down as he lowered the volume. "Yeah, how much for one of those?" the green-haired boy asked, pointing behind the man to a sports drink. The man handed the boy the bottle. "Kids these days, they have no respect for the press," the man grumbled under his breath as he put money into the cash register. The boy smiled in return, before opening the bottle and taking a swig of it, before riding his board once more as he put his headphones back in. His ride wasn't a long one, less than 15 minutes as he stopped before what appeared to be a small dojo. 4 turtles. A small dojo located in the heart of New York, run by a man that had the appearance of a rat with his quirk. Bullied at a young age, the rat learned the old martial art known as Jiu-Jitsu, and later he opened his very own dojo, named after his sons who apparently have mutations that made them look like turtles. Rumor had it his sons are also pro-heroes that live in the shadows. He opened the doors that led to the dojo, nodding to the man that was stationed at the front desk. Okay, man was stretching it. His appearance was literally that of a cat made of ice cream. Definitely one of the weirdest quirks Izuku ever had the pleasure of documenting. Turns out his ability allows him to hive brain freezes to anyone he sees. With a wave he entered the main area. The place had multiple mats that surrounded a circle. His sensei the rat was currently in the middle meditating. He kneeled before his sensei, taking a deep breath as he closed his eyes, before immediately opening one of his eyes to look at the rat looking at him with an amused look. "Ah, young Midoriya, I see you have returned," the rat said in a voice full of wisdom, despite him just stating the obvious. "You need to work on your patience. You barely meditated, if that's what it could be called, for a second," the rat said as he stood up, beckoning him to stand up with him. "Yeah, I know, sensei. You know it's not something that just comes to me," the boy answered as he followed his master through the dojo, his eyes landing on a small picture on the wall of him during his first tournament win, the medal hanging from his neck as he held a smile on his face. "I'm sure you're aware of what day it is?" the rat man asked with his hands behind his back, his strides long and confident as his tail dragged behind him under his dress-type clothes. "It's a robe." "Yes, I'm well aware, that's why I'm here," the student replied. "Today's the day that I've trained for," he finished, clenching his fist as he stared at the rat master of ninjitsu. "Well then, allow me to be the first to wish you good luck, my son. Me and my sons will be by your side in an instant should you need help on your quest. Thanks, Master Splinter," the boy said with a grin, getting a groan from the man as he slapped his face with his palm. "First Mikey, then you, and now the whole damn dojo is calling me that name," the man finished, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Stay safe, and make sure to show that man that you aren't afraid of him anymore." His emerald eyes got a look of determination as he stood before that rat. "Hi, sensei." He finished, his eyes shining blue as two blue katanas formed in his hands, his stripes illuminating blue as he slashed his swords through the air. A large blue portal opened before the pair, the boy looking behind him once more as he took a step forward, and suddenly he was now on top of a building that overlooked the School for Heroes. UA High School. He jumped down with ease as he landed on the sidewalk, the watch on his wrist changing time zones in an instant as it shifted from 6 p.m. to 7 a.m. He walked through the gates as he saw someone about to eat earth as they tripped over their own shoes. In the blink of an eye, he grabbed the boy from the back of his shirt, his eyes going wide as he realized he wasn't about to die. "Dude, you've got to be more careful, man," he said, talking in Japanese, fluent as if he had been speaking it his whole life, which was accurate but not the point. "Dude, you just saved me, my life flashed before my eyes." The boy spoke as Izuku got a better look at him. He had blonde hair with a bolt of black lightning down one of his sides. "Cool hair, man. You an electricity type?" Izuku asked, brushing off the boy's shoulders as he comedically shifted the boy around back onto his feet. "You know it. What about you? What's with the swords on your back?" "Yeah, they allow me to teleport. Name's is Yanaki Hamato," the boy said, almost slipping as he said his name, stretching out his hand to the boy. "That's awesome. Name's Kaminari Denki," the blonde replied as he shook the boy's hand, a few loose sparks coming from his fingertips as they shook hands. "And that's the spark of a new friendship," the blonde joked, getting a good smile from the green one in return, before separating their hands and walking together. In the corner of his eye, Izuku swore he saw a woman with spiky blonde hair walking beside them a ways off, but when he turned, he saw no one. Hey man, the hall's this way." Kaminari spoke up, pointing towards the main hall where several students were gathering in lines waiting for their turn. When Izuku made it to the front, he looked at the woman in front of him. She had long black hair with red glasses, a costume that was very suggestive. "Ah, another young hopeful. How may I help you, young man?" she asked in a sweetly seductive tone, her eyebrows wiggling as she spoke. He gave a bright smile as he responded, "Yanaki Hamato, here to take the entrance exams for the hero course," the boy said, the woman studying him analytically before she spotted the swords sheathed to his back. "I'm afraid you have to send in a formal request to use support equipment, dearie," she said, gesturing to the katanas strapped to his back. "Huh? Oh, I'm sorry, these swords are my quirk," he said as he grabbed the handle of one of his blades, his eyes glowing blue as it disappeared before it reappeared a second later. "My quirk is labeled Weapon Summon. It's just easier for me to carry my weapons around rather than summoning them," he finished. She rose her eyebrow at his explanation, before nodding and handed him a sticker and a schedule for the day. "Interesting quirk, young man. I hope you know how to use those," she finished as she motioned for the next in line to come up. "I do," he replied, walking down the halls as his new friend Kaminari waited for him at the corner. "Which hall did you get?" "I've got hall 3. The blonde said as he grabbed his new friend's paper before reading it. "Aw man, you got number 2. I was hoping that I could get some help from you. No offense, you seem like a smart guy," he finished, taking a step back as he met the questioning look from Izuku. "I'm sure you'll do just fine. See you in the hero course, Kaminari." He waved behind him, walking towards the large hall that had the number 2 plastered at the doorway. His eyes darted around as he began to study his competition. A girl with short brown hair and blush marks made her way into his vision right before the two somehow slammed into each other in a way that couldn't even be described. "So, may I ask, how the hell did this even happen?" Izuku asked as he twisted his arm and somehow felt the heel of his foot. The girl blushed as she herself tried to untangle herself from the human knot that they made. "I am so sorry," she stuttered. "Poor girl. She probably didn't even realize she slammed into me until it was too late, must be nervous." Hey, it's okay, you need to relax, panicking right now won't help anyone. I lived with 4 rowdy brothers for a few years, this has happened more times than I will ever admit. So just relax, and twist your right arm 90 degrees clockwise, and then twist your left leg until you can't anymore." The girl nodded as her face became even more flustered, but nonetheless she followed the instructions, and before she knew it the two were spiraling and somehow came undone. The two created quite the crowd as the two sat up, looking at the gazing eyes as he felt the girl's nerves bursting from her body. In a moment of both clarity and idiocy, he raised his hands and spoke. Behold! The incredible human pretzel technique was concurred by two high schoolers. Beat that, you cats that play chopsticks with chopsticks. A few snickers broke the silence of the crowd, before one person actually started losing it and laughed their head off, literally. Eventually the crowd dispersed and left only the two on the ground. Getting to his feet, he put a hand down to the girl. Hey, so that was something. My name is Yunaki Hamato. She stared at the hand for all of 5 seconds, before blinking and taking his hand. Uraraka Ochako. Thanks for, earlier, she said, looking away as her cheeks lit up, even more. Cute. Hey, don't worry about it. Weird shit happens. Good luck to you, Uraraka. See you in Ua, he said, waving to the girl as he entered the hall that was assigned to him. The phone in his pocket buzzed as he was walking through the halls, the contact labeled as the party dude. The party dude. Izuku, my dude, good luck on your exams. We're all rooting for you back in the lair. Also, the guys have special messages for you. I quote Donnie. Don't blow something up. Raph says. Don't screw this up, and Leo says to embrace your inner captain Ryan and do something. I say you got this. So long as you don't get into a human pretzel, then nothing will go wrong. That's what my fortune cookie said. Good luck. P.S. Pizza party on us when you pass. The green one. Too late for that. In the upside made new friends. See you soon, hermanos. He replied in text, shutting off his phone before entering the doors that led to the exam hall. He sat in one of the seats in the back, before immediately another student sat right beside him. He did a double take. The guy who sat beside him had a crow's head for a head. If you're going to laugh, get it over with. We won't blame you, much, we revel in darkness. Dude, my sensei is a literal rat. If I had problem with a dude with a crow's head, my sensei would have me eating out of a cheese grater for the rest of my life. Before the boy could respond, a loud booming voice broke through the entire room. Good morning, little listeners. I'm sure you're all revved up for the practical exam. But before we can see or show off your medal, first we've got to get through these annoying tests to show how much of a big brain you all have. Can ya dig it? The silence was deafening, the sounds of the cricket following the boy with a fake mustache speaking volumes as no one spoke. Yeah! Izuku shouted, raising his fist into the air for support of the radio hero. The hero's face brightened in an instant. Yeah. That guy gets it. Now these tests will be distributed around here in just a few minutes, but before the test can begin, we have our very own Principal Nezu here to say a few words. The booming hero spoke as he walked off to the side, a spotlight shining from the rafters, before the floor on the stage split in two and a tower emerged from the ground. A rat mouse bear dog thing stood in the middle, classed in a suit and tie. Good morning, young hero hopefuls. Am I a mouse? A bear? A dog? I'm the principal of UA. Each year we have countless people try out for our prestigious courses, whether that's business, support, general or heroic courses. You are all heroes in your own rights. This test that you all will be taking has been handcrafted by the greatest minds that UA has to offer. The test is broken up into two parts. The first focuses on the basic principles that each of you learned throughout middle school and your first few years of high school. The second part are made up of several basic questions. You will be required to give at least 3 paragraphs for each of the questions. Before you all start, allow me to give you a few words of advice. Should you ever find yourself looking for answers, ask yourself this. What would a hero do? With that, the spotlight turned off and the creature that so many teachers feared disappeared in a puff of smoke, gone as if he never appeared before the audience at all. In the next minute, the students suddenly had a test before them with pencils and an eraser beside them as well. Izuku grabbed his pencil and immediately began to work out the questions, stopping only 2.5 seconds into the test before slamming his head against his desk. To anyone else it appeared as though he would fail, thinking that the test was too hard for him. They put grammar mistakes on the test. He muttered to himself, before picking up his head and began to fix the mistakes while answering questions. After an agonizing hour of answering questions and fixing the painfully obvious grammar errors, Izuku finally made it to the final question. What does it mean to be a hero? He tapped his pencil against the bottom of his lip, his thoughts a mile a minute before he began to write down his answer, filling nearly a full page of what he knows what a hero is. He stood up, gaining the attention of everyone as he walked up to the front. "What's up, little listener? Sorry, but I can't give you any help on your test." "Nah, I'm just here to put my test in," Izuku responded, handing the pro hero his completed test, getting a slight shocked face from the pro. "Are you sure? The test is for 2 hours. You're finished it in 1. "I'm sure, sir. Double-checked it and everything." "All right, you can go ahead and wait in the cafeteria for everyone else." The pro finished, glancing over the test briefly before snapping a picture and sending it to the mouse that ruled over the school with an adorable paw that can rip out your arteries in an instant. In the principal's office, the creature known for mercifulness of destroying his enemies with a single thought, the creature sat with a glass of tea in his paw. Before him sat a ghostly thin man with long blonde hair. "Toshinori, I'm sure you aware why I called you here?" The manimal spoke, his beady black eyes staring into the soul of the man before him, the #1 pro hero, All Might. "Yes, I do, sir. You're here to warn me the importance of my arrival at UA, that somewhere in this school, my successor very well could be in these halls," the human stick figure said, taking a sip of American coffee, one of the few indulgences he can still have after his injury. "Yes, I cannot stress this enough. You must keep a close eye, because even if they might seem perfect, there is always something beneath the surface that shows the true character of someone. My master told me that she felt a certain connection, a spark between us. That's how she knew I was the right person to wield the power bestowed upon me. That's what I'm going to look for, a spark." The mouse merely nodded, taking a loud sip of his tea as he got a notification on his quiet, frankly freaking-looking phone that suspiciously looked like a human bone. "Oh, well, would you look at this? It appears we have some interesting students applying today." The mouse bear dog thing didn't explain further, merely pocketing his phone with a freaking smile on his face, his eyes glinting something dangerous. "Well now, I believe it's time for us to go to the observation deck. Perhaps you'll feel that spark you talked about," the bear mechanician said, jumping down from his chair and began his walk towards the observation deck. It wasn't too long before people began to join Izuku in another hall, his seat being beside a girl with horns and bright blue eyes. Apparently this was the section reserved for those from overseas. The girl spoke in broken Japanese, her nerves clearly showing as she fiddled with her thumbs. "Excuse, sit here please," she asked, looking away from the boy who smiled in return. He recognized the accent she held as Texan. "Yup, no problem," he replied in English, moving out of the way for the pony-human hybrid. She let out a sigh of relief. "Oh, you speak English? Thank goodness. My name's Pony Sutantori," the girl replied with enough energy to rival his orange brother from another mother. "Izuku Midoriya, nice to meet you," he said, putting his attention back to where he saw a man with long black hair was laying down and was somehow asleep in a position that was previously thought impossible for human to sleep in. "What's up, listeners? It's time to start the practical exam for the heroics course. But unlike the real world, we're not gonna drop you in the deep end without floaties, so here's the exam." Present Mike shouted over the entire crowd, a spotlight shining on him as a screen behind him came to life. "You all will be split up into different mock cities where you will have to compete against the other participants to score as many points as you can. In each city you will have 3 different types of enemy robots. The robots are separated by size, and you will also have a..." "Excuse me? Someone phoning in a question? Hit me with it," the hero spoke out, pointing to a taller boy with dark blue hair and glasses. With a push of his middle finger to the bridge of his glasses, he stood up and towered over everyone. "Yes. It says here on the flyer that there are 4 types of robots, not 3. If this is an error, then it is highly unacceptable for such a prestigious school for UA. And you," he said, pointing to where a girl with blonde hair and red eyes was sitting, her eyes closed as she listened to what the hero was saying. You talking to me, 4 eyes?" she shouted back, opening her eyes to see the boy pointing at her with an accusatory look. "Yes. It is highly unprofessional to have your eyes closed during such an important information event. Clearly you don't care about attending such an attitude of ignorance. If that is so, please exit and stop distracting those of us who actually aim to be heroes," he shouted back, sitting back down as the girl's teeth chattered against each other in anger, small sparks coming from her palms as she glared at the boy. "Whatever," she said as she sat back down with a huff, her mind racing as she tried to calm down. Damn it, Katsumi, relax, relax, this isn't just about you, you're going to become a hero for both you and Zuzu. Stop talking like as if he's dead. He's too stubborn to just die. He's out there somewhere, and I'll find him. I promise you that, Izuku. I will find you, and we will fulfill our promises. She thought to herself as she felt her anger subsiding, her red eyes getting a glint of determination as she calmed down and began paying adamant attention to the radio hero's words. On the other side of the room, Izuku was having a very hard time breathing at the moment. There she was, Katsumi Bakugo, his best friend from a time before he left to New York. How is it fair she somehow got prettier? He thought to himself as he shook his head, thoughts for another time. Right now he had to focus on passing, and if his eye went over to her a few times during the day, so be it. I was just about to get to that. The final enemy type is worth 0 points. It's more of an obstacle than anything. It's possible to take it down, it's just not recommended. Now quirks are of course permitted, but should you do something heroic and attack another applicant, then you'll be harshly penalized. The hero spoke out, and before we begin, allow me to give you all a bit of inspiration from our very own school motto. With words from one of the greatest heroes that the world has ever known, those who rise against the burdens of pressure, and fight for a better tomorrow, you go beyond. Plus ultra. Shota Aizawa liked to think of himself as a rational man, which was why he was currently sitting in a pitch-black room with several other pro-heroes that were glued to a certain screen. It was irrational to the man to already be looking for potential hero students. You couldn't judge someone purely on how impressive they might look, or immediately dismiss someone because they might look unimpressive at the first glance. The proof of that statement was standing right beside him, the newest member of UA's staff, All Might in his skinny form, a form that no one would look twice at. The hero groaned as he decided to take a quick glance at the screen. Despite his disdain for how the test itself worked, he couldn't argue with the fact that it did show results. Results of people with powerful quirks, but it also showed those who had the essence of being a hero, heroes that would shape the future of society as a whole. His eyes felt dry as he saw a student that reminded him so much as himself, a purple-haired boy with eye bags that could rival his. Despite his best efforts, the man pulled up the file on the purple boy. His quirk was a mental quick similar to his own, with the ability to put people in a trance after getting a response from the other person. By all accounts, the boy had what others would call his quick or himself villainous, an act that Shota had no doubt was caused by a society that believed that quirks dictated a person's future. Ideals that were brought forth by a group known as the Meta Liberation Army, or the MLA for short, a group of individuals that greatly benefited by the fact that people outcasted many because of how they looked or how their quirk acted. They opened them with open arms. The only group of people who the MLA wouldn't welcome were those who didn't possess any quirk, the 20% of the population who hadn't evolved enough to develop an extraordinary ability. Shaking his head, he brought himself out of his thoughts, hearing the man who forced himself to become his best friend speak loudly to the underground hero. "Hey Shota, did you and Emmy have a kid without either of us knowing?" The loud pro-hero asked the man whose face was hid behind his scarf. He gave a deadpan look and raised an eyebrow. "Don't even joke about that," he replied, the mention of his wife, the woman being one of few that actually made him genuinely smile, even without the use of her quirk, a beacon in the dark life he had as an underground hero. Absent-mindedly he rubbed his ring finger, the wedding band on his left hand, and feeling the cold metal centering him once more, his tired expression hiding the emotions playing in his mind. He watched as his best friend exited the room and made his way to all the hero hopefuls that began forming around the mock cities. His eyes moved back to the purple-haired boy, his expression being that of concern. He understood the feeling as he himself felt the same way when he was once a hero hopeful, before failing and being sent to general education. He managed to transfer after winning the sports festival, where he met the extrovert who adopted him, and a friend who he failed to save, a time that seemed so recent, but yet so far away. He still remembers that day. Shota and his friend, Oroboro, interned under the same hero. A villain attacked and Oroboro wouldn't leave until he was sure every last person was saved. He died after pushing someone out of the path of a falling building. Shota searched for hours for any signs of his friend. The only evidence he found were the goggles that now hung around his neck. Truth be told, he became harsh and cold, His future students he treated them as if they were Ouroboros, and expelling anyone that he deemed without potential so that he wouldn't have the thoughts of his students falling to the same fate as his dear friend. And then a woman who first annoyed him to no end, to always badger him and joke about getting married, a woman who always had a dumb smile on her face. Her quirk allowed her to make anyone laugh, a quirk she used to subdue her enemies in fits of laughter. Her name was Emi Fukukado, and she was the reason that he now saw the world in shades of gray, and the reason that he now felt something his heart besides pain. He shook his head slightly at the fond memory of him and the woman that somehow convinced him to marry her. Her old running joke actually providing merit as she too wore a matching wedding band around her ring finger. She was also a teacher, only she taught the students at Shibetsuku High. His eyes landed on another boy who grabbed Shota's attention. He had short green hair that was shaved on its sides, with a bushy part being at the top. He watched as the boy grabbed a pair of twin katanas that were strapped to his back. He rose an eyebrow at that. Support gear wasn't forbidden, but it was uncommon, and that stirred enough of an interest in the teacher's lounge, but he didn't remember a boy that submitted a pair or swords. "What's the deal with him?" another one of the teacher asked. "Vlad King, the blood hero," as Shota wasn't mistaken, pointing to the same kid that caught his attention earlier. "Interesting. It's been a long time since a student has came with weapons of that caliber. Early 1800s influence if I'm not mistaken," the support hero powerloader said as he put a hand under his chin. "HMPF. Shota hummed. The way the boy held the swords proved that he had training. He could tell by the way his fingers wrapped around the handle. Most people with no training try and grip the handle as hard as they can, unaware that it's the worst way to hold a blade, stiff but firm, and that's what the boy had. "Oh, it's him. I knew he would cause people to turn heads," one of Shota's few genuine friends said. She had long black hair that perfectly framed her face, and red glasses that added to her appeal. "And how is that midnight?" the mouse bear dog a machination said, jumping out of Aizawa's scarf without a trace of where he was before. Any other man might have screamed, and several did. All Might being one of those that coughed up blood that hid his girlish scream. Getting over her shock, the R-rated heroine continued, "I was the one who checked him in. He didn't put in a request for support gear, so I thought it was interesting that he just showed up with those swords on his back," she began, pausing for a moment before continuing. "Turns out that's his quirk. I think he said it was weapon something. He just summoned one of those swords out of thin air. It was actually really cool," she finished, getting a nod from most of the teachers. The rodent principal said as he began to pull up the boy's file. "Ah, here he is. Yanaki Hamato. Quirk. Weapon summon. Schooled in the States, originally from here in Musatafu, no relations to anyone. He lives in a small apartment in New York, and was trained by Hamato Yoshi, from the Dojo 4 Turtles," the mouse thing said as he read the file, his beady eyes stopping at several points as his intelligent mind went to work on the boy's file. "Interesting. The quirk is classified as a mutation type. I'm curious as to why," the rodent said as he finished his observations. "Anything about this boy you're not telling us, Nezu?" All Might asked, his mind racing a mile a minute as he racked his brain on how he recognized the boy. The man wasn't good at remembering faces, but for some reason he felt like he had seen this boy before, and that name, Midoriya, it sounded familiar in an odd fuzzy kinda way. "Oh, plenty. For example, his quirk doesn't just allow him to summon weapons," the small bear said with a smile as it leapt from the hero's scarf. "Are you going to elaborate on that, Nezu?" the tired hero asked as he rubbed his eyes. "Nope," the rodent answered cheerfully, going over to the desk that had the title, Overlord, engraved on the front of the desk. "Well, I believe we've given the students enough time to prepare. I believe we're ready, present Mike," the mouse overlord happily said over the intercom, Aizawa flinching as he could hear his extrovert friend yelling at the top of his lungs to go. The green-haired boy that previously held all the teachers' attention at one point got into a stance the Aizawa thought looked like he was about to slash into an invisible enemy. He rolled his eyes at the no-doubt way that the boy tries to pump himself up, an irrational thought process as in real life you wouldn't have time to motivate yourself. At least that's what he was going to say, until suddenly he disappeared in a flash of blue, appearing down inside the mock city and making quick work of the robots. To the untrained eye it looked like he was teleporting, which was exactly what he was doing. Each time he made a random slash into the air, a blue portal would open, before he would disappear again and reappear right before another enemy. A warping quirk. Certainly not common quirk by any means. Perhaps there's more to this boy than meets the eye. The underground hero thought as he continued to watch the screens, a single though constantly popping into his head. The more and more H found his gaze wandering to the boy. Problem child. She felt good, the sparks coming from her hands giving her a calming sensation as she felt the power beneath the surface bubble up ready to blow. The moment she heard the radio hero, present Mike, who she may or may not listen to every weekend, she used her quick to propel herself forward at a speed that could rival many speed quirks. To her left she saw another boy beside her. The boy that called her out earlier was struggling to keep pace with her. Despite the obvious fact that he had some speed quirk, she was beating him. One of her signature smirks came to her face, another large explosion coming from her hands as she launched herself to the first robot that crossed her path. The machine was large with multiple arms, missile launchers strapped to each of the forearms of the metal opponent. She grinned a feral smile as she sparked her hand, and sent an explosion point blank at the single red eye that formed his head. The machine became a pile of rubble as smoke began to steam from the destroyed parts. To her right she immediately saw another two robots advancing towards her. They were much lankier than the one she fought before, larger in scale and had large blades on their forearms. They moved as fast as a ninja, appearing right before her eyes and slashed into the air. A stray flock of blonde hair slowly fluttered to the ground. Getting over her slight shock, she reeled her fists back and sent an American haymaker connecting to one of the machine's abdomen, a giant hole now residing in the robot's chest. That's 3 points, and it's took you nearly a minute. That's not good enough, Katsumi. He would be disappointed. Push harder, only the best is good enough. She yelled in her head, a fiery look of determination now setting in her eyes as she blasted another robot to Kingdom Come, yelling out various war cries as she gained more and more points, her arms beginning to burn slightly as she began to feel the overuse of her quirk. And then the ground began to shake, a heaven-piercing scream filling the air as she looked up and saw it. What the beep? He felt the stripes beneath his clothes begin to flow with power. The swords in his hands connecting to the energy he was creating, his eyes and stripes beginning to glow their blue as his katanas shone. He heard the loud hero yell go. His body moved before a moment hesitation. He planted his right foot back as he raised both of his arms into a slashing motion, his eyes going slightly wide at the sudden bright blue that filled his vision. Subconsciously he beeped in his breath and disappeared before everyone. To describe the sensation or portal jumping is nearly impossible. Your senses are on overdrive, especially when you're the one controlling where you end up. For years Izuku had trouble teleporting, always ending in a place that wasn't where he intended to be. One time he accidentally teleported to China while trying to go to the local pizza shop. When you're in the portal, the world seems to slow around you, the time between portals feeling like seconds, but in reality it's no more than a fraction of a second. His pupils dilated as he focused on his destination, a blue flash of lightning as he appeared right before a robot. Its red eye lit up in recognition of an enemy threat, one of its 6 arms immediately flying into the air, in an attempt to hit Izuku. A small smirk appears on the boy's face, before disappearing once more and reappearing right behind the robot, a fast slash with his swords cutting the head clean off, its red eye dimming as it hit the floor. With a flick of the wrist and a body spin he launched his sword from his hand, the blade flying through the air with precision that would rival the greatest marksman in the world. The sword struck another robot in the chest, causing the smaller robot to sway backwards a small amount. A flash of blue and he appeared on his blade once more, stabbing his blades into its head as its body fell limp. The hairs on the back of his neck suddenly went up, a kind of fourth sense that his sensei managed to pound into his skull as he ducked under an incoming projectile that was aimed directly for his head. He heard an explosion and an outcry of disdain as pink filled his vision. Darting his eye to the left he saw a student stuck in a pink-like substance that hardened in an instant. At least they're not insane enough to use actual misses, he thought to himself as he cut through the air in front of him, another missile entering his portal before another appeared right behind the robot, its own weapon rendering him captured. He looked over to his shoulder before teleporting to where the boy was being held. He had purple hair that was somehow defying gravity, tired eyes that looked as though he had just given up. Hold still. he said as he cut down on the strange material, making quick work of the hardened substance. Thanks. The boy muttered under his breath, grabbing absent-mindedly at his wrists as he rolled them. You're lucky, your quirk is perfect for this. Teleportation. What a joke. The boy dryly said, looking at the ground as he kicked at some scraps of metal. Yeah, it is a perfect quirk. But it wasn't always like that. Izuku said as he sheathed his katanas on his pack, before getting hold of something long in the scrap pile. What are you talking about? The purple boy asked, looking at the boy curiously. My quirk is a mental game. If I'm not 100% focused on where I'm going to be, I might as well end up on Easter Island. It took years until I could reputedly go where I wanted. He grunted as he now held a large pipe in his hands, the metal glinting in the sun as he held it to the boy. The robots have good defense, but their weak points are where their joints are. Aim for the knees and then hit them in the back of the neck. Izuku said as he put the pipe in the unknown boy's hand before looking around and spotting another robot. Why are you helping me? The boy asked. Because you gave up without even trying. You've got a mental quirk, that much is obvious. Seriously, have you even lifted a weight in your life? You look like a stiff breeze will knock you over. The green one said as he slashed through the air and created a portal. He aimed his sword at the boy. What's your name? He asked, the blade beginning to blow blue as he aimed it in the air. Hitoshi. Shinso Hitoshi. The boy said with a small smile on his face, the grasp on the metal pipe tightening as he got a look of determination. A smile crept upon Izuku's face as he slashed through the air and created another portal before Shinso. Jump through the portal. This is your test, Shinso. Will you rise to the occasion? Izuku asked, the boy nodding as he charged into the portal, reappearing just beyond where they were, right behind a robot and making quick work of the machine. Then I'll see you in the hero course. Shinso Hitoshi. Sparks flew between his fingers as he charged into the mock city, his lightning blonde hair and black streak flowing backwards as he charged at the behemoth that showed itself to him. Indiscriminate shock. 1000 volts. He yelled as his hands made contact with the robot, its arms began to fray around before shutting off. He felt a little dizzy but nothing serious as he shook off the excess electricity running across his fingertips. If his memory served him correctly, he just short-circuited a two-pointer, which he knew wasn't nearly enough to pass. Hell, he was on the fence as it was. He knew he wasn't the smartest tool in the shed, at least not when it came to science of math, or even history. But what he did know was electrical currents. He had to, otherwise he would fry his brain every time he used his quirk. Granted, it still happened whenever he used too much voltage, but he was still learning about control. He clenched his hands as he activated his quirk, yellow lightning surrounding his hands and focusing on his knuckles, making them glow a bright yellow. He ducked beneath another wild swing directed aimlessly at his head. He yelled as he punched into the robot's chest, increasing the power output until its entire torso exploded in a burst of yellow lightning. Thank you, Sensei Grenos, the boy said to himself as he began to jump back into the fray, contending against his fellow hero hopefuls. He grinned as another robot was fried by his touch. By his count his was somewhere around 20 points, probably not enough to pass, but he still had a few minutes. His smile showed his teeth as he pushed his body to its limits. See you in the hero course, Hamato. He yelled to himself, before feeling the ground beneath him suddenly break apart, and a giant behemoth of metal stared right at him. He gulped as he turned on his heels. Nope. He began to run until he saw something in the corner of his eyes, a girl with purple hair and some of the weirdest ears he had ever seen. She was clutching her head tightly as her face showed an expression of pure pain, and it was clear as day that she couldn't ground herself. He saw a giant piece of rubble fall from one of the surrounding buildings. His body moved before he could think, sparks emitting from his body as he focused all of the excess voltage into his legs, and then his right foot. He had only ever done this once before. The power surrounded itself around his right foot as he pounded onto a piece of metal. His sparks connected with the piece of rubble, his body igniting in a fury of speed as he launched himself towards the girl at insane speeds. He felt his mind begin to cloud over as he felt himself reach his limits. He tackled her into the ground just before the mound of concrete would have squashed her. Seriously, safety much. The two landed as he instinctively pulled her into his chest, his back hitting the hard floor as his sudden boost ended just as fast as it begun. Their eyes met for the first time. Black eyes met brown as the two stared at each other for a moment. Her hand was pushed against her chest, her ears seemingly mobile as they reeled back in shock as she immediately got up from him, her eyes wide as she tried to regain her composure. His gaze sat upon her face. Her purple hair was short, with what appeared to be wave-beat highlights in her hair. Her ears had what appeared to be jacks connected to them. They were pointed right at him as he got up from the ground. He shook his head as he got up, only to feel his wrist grabbed by her as she pulled him besides her, a piece of ruble suddenly falling where he once was. "Gee, thanks," he stuttered out, getting lost in her eyes. "And no problem. Now we're even," she said, pulling him beside her as she tried to exit the small building they barreled into. "Come on, we need to get out of here," Kaminari yelled as he felt his cheeks redden slightly, a spark connecting them that wasn't his own electricity. The girl nodded as the two followed each other until the exam had concluded, going their separate ways as he wondered. Wait, what was her name? Help. One word, one small word made her freeze in place. Her red ruby eyes going wide as her body felt numb, the sparks in her hands stopping their rhythmic movements. Her eyes zeroed in on a girl with permanent blush marks on her face, her body pinned under a large amount of ruble that was from one of the many buildings being destroyed. She felt herself leave her body as her breathing hitched, a vision of a smaller her and a boy with curly green hair. She was on the ground with tears in her eyes as she saw her friend being pulled away by a man in the shadows. Over to her side she saw the body of her dear Auntie Midoriya. She saw the boy struggling against the unknown man's grasp. She was on her knees as she extended her arms to him, hoping and praying that she could grab onto his hand and save him. "Somebody help me please." The same girl from earlier seemingly snapped Katsumi out of her stupor, her hands sparking once more as she launched herself to where the girl was, passing by the stuck-up four eyes from earlier. She flew through the air before placing one hand in front of her and releasing another small explosion to stop her moment and rested now beside the girl trapped. "Close your damn eyes now," she screamed out, placing her hands on top of the slab, creating an explosion so precise it obliterated the entire slab. She grabbed onto the girl and yanked her free from the dust that surrounded her body, and pulled her onto her back. "Hold on and don't let go," she yelled as she leaned forward, hesitating for a second as she let the sweat build up in her arms, before releasing everything she had left and sent the two flying. She heard the girl yelp at the sudden blast, the two becoming a blur before slowing down and crashing into the ground, Katsumi finally hitting her limit as she couldn't release another explosion. She got up quickly, grabbing the girl around her shoulder and prompting her up, before breaking into an all-out run as the two managed to barely escape the path of the giant metal beast. She saw as a crowd began to form around them, a snarl escaping her lips as she slowly let the girl off her shoulders onto a nearby platform. "How's your ankle?" she asked, noticing how the girl was cradling her ankle as she sat. Fine," she stuttered. Beep, she had a stutter, just like him. She ignored what the girl was saying, her mind going back to the moment where she lost her best friend. The man that was pulling Zuzu into a black mist, the two children reaching out their arms as they tried to grab into each other. And then, the man said something. It was a voice that commanded fear into the hearts of anyone who heard it. She couldn't understand him fully, the only words she heard were, "I'll kill." Her friend stopped trying to reach out to her, looking at her with those emerald eyes that made her heart skip a beat, only they weren't full of wonder, they were filled with fear. That was the last time she ever saw him. "So yeah, gee, thanks for saving me," the girl with blush marks exclaimed happily, her brown hair swaying with each time she lifted her arms as she spoke. "Don't mention it," she huffed, her body slumping as she herself sat down, nearby the girl as she began to flex her arms and felt a sharp sense of pain in her forearms. Her quirk allowed her to create nitroglycerin-like sweat, allowing her to detonate her sweat at will. Naturally, her body had adaptations to help accommodate the extreme stress from the explosions, but even reinforced shoulders and denser bones had a limit, and she just hit hers. All right, listeners, that concludes the physical portion of the exam. Please stand by for anyone who needs medical attention, help is on the way. Whoa, what the heck is happening in City 4? Nezu shut down th. Everyone in her area instinctively flinched backwards when they heard the sound of an explosion, all but Katsumi. She clenched her fists in frustration as she knew she couldn't do a thing to whatever was happening. A giant shadow began to form over area that Katsumi and the group of extras that were surrounding her and the girl she saved that she learned was named Uraraka. Looking up, everyone saw something that makes everyone's blood run cold. There was another 0-pointer, only this one was so much larger, and its eye glowing yellow instead of its normal red hue. Everyone began running as the robot was about to slam a fist down, before suddenly it jerked backwards, a giant red hand clamping down around the machine's shoulder. It was thrown backwards at the sudden movement, before another giant hand slammed itself into the head of the robot. The robot swayed to the left as the red figure made itself known. Its entire body made of a translucent red, its head had no facial features, no eyes or mouth, it had pointed elbows that looked sharp. But what really got Katsumi interested was the small figure that was located in the giant red being's chest. She was too far away to see who they were, but for some reason she felt like she knew him. She watched as the two fought, grinding her teeth together as she glared at the two, a single thought going through her head as she tried to spark up her quirk, doing so only to find herself in extreme pain. Damn it! His blue eyes shined with admiration, even though the world was such a cruel place to be a hero, a woman with long black hair, flying in the air like an angel. And an angel she was to Toshinori Yagi. After throwing himself into a situation where he ended up facing against 3 larger guys with quirks he couldn't even describe, this woman swooped in and saved him with a smile. This was the first time he met his future master, the person who gave him the world, and only asked for him to do his best with the gift bestowed upon him. A quirk that was capable of being passed on to future generations, a quirk created for a single purpose, to defeat a man who was evil incarnate, his name. All for one. A man who defeated him in his prime, leaving a wound so fatal that it permanently injured him, and was limiting him to only 3 hours each day. That was the reason as to why he was now a member of UA's teachers, to look for a successor that would make sure that the world had a bright future. They were a few people who caught his eye. A girl that created explosions, although he doubted she would make an ideal symbol with the anger she harbored. Another was a boy with red hair that was able to harden his body, making him a literal tank. Mix that with the power of One for All, he could truly be unstoppable. He saw as the boy rushed in and helped other applicants by tanking hits that could have seriously hurt them. By all accounts he was a perfect person to wield the power. Yet, for some weird feeling he couldn't understand, his mind kept drifting to the boy with green hair that was teleporting around the entire Mach City. He certainly had an interesting quirk. A warp quirk was exceedingly rare. Very few people in history actually having one. He would certainly be a huge asset to any battlefield he entered. He saw as the boy was smiling and making one-liners as he effortlessly sliced through the robots, racking up points like it wasn't a challenge. Others would call the boy cocky, or maybe even go as far as saying he wasn't taking this seriously, Aizawa, but Yagi could also see something else. A spark of determination. He wasn't able to see very much of it, but occasionally he would see a glint in the boy's eyes that he couldn't help to feel like he recognized somehow. He racked his mind as he tried to remember where he once saw the boy, his pupils dilating as he finally remembered the moment when he first saw the boy. His body was bleeding out, his entire left side was missing his organs and pools of blood freely flowed from his stomach. The man before him was smiling as he saw the man's red eyes shining with something that sent chills down the hero's spine, a look of total victory. I can't take your quirk, one of 2 in the entire world that currently eludes me. The villain said as he crouched down beside the dying hero, a finger on his chin. I always wondered why I was never able to take back what I gave to my brother, but then I finally realized. The man said as a portal opened around them, a small boy in chains falling through the portal. The boy had his head shaven down, his body was littered in scars and he had unusual stripes on his arms. But what really made the hero's blood boil, was eyes the boy held. Cold lifeless eyes stared at him, a look of horror crossing over the boy's face as he struggled against the chains that were molded into his skin. What have you done? The hero yelled, choking back the blood that threatened to spill from his lungs as he tried to stand. The villain smiled as he stretched his hands towards the boy. I grew quite an interest in the young boy. His quirk was something I really couldn't pass on, yet something curious happened when I attempted to take it. I couldn't. I came to a similar result that I had when I tried to steal the quirk your master had. The man said with a chuckle, grabbing the boy by the head and attempting to steal his quirk while red spirals of energy surrounded the boy's head. The boy screamed in pain as red bolts of lightning arched across his body, his stripes glowing different colors before his body slumped to the ground. The villain looked over the body with a smirk on his face. I do rather enjoy how his screams sound though. Yagi had never, and would never feel the same amount of rage he had in that moment. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he was incapable of smiling. Deep inside him he felt the energy of One for All reacting in a way he had never felt before, almost as if the quirk itself was screaming in rage at what the man has done. To think, I can't steal his quirk because his quirk factor is 4 separate elements, but that begs the question, Toshinori. The villain speaks as he crouched to the man's eye level. What secrets are hiding beneath the surface of One for All? Yagi looked into the eyes of evil, his sapphire blue eyes shining with both hate and determination as he grit his teeth. He silenced his scream with his lower lip as he drew blood, his body screaming at him to stop, before his body crumpled once more. How amusing. The great All Might dying in a puddle of his own blood, in front of a child that he couldn't save. How poetic. It reminds me so much of how Nana died, only she died protecting everyone she could. You couldn't even do that. The villain gloated as he grabbed All Might by the hair and rose his head up to look at the small boy in front of them. Look at him, All Might. For days he cried, saying you would come and rescue him. It was so much fun to break his spirit. He even used to smile at the face of fear like you. Where is your smile, All Might? A child held onto his smile longer than you. Yagi couldn't look away, the villain's words being drowned out by the boy. His body was shaking as he tried to get up. The man saw how the boy refused to quit, his small hands unsteady as he fell over and over, before he finally got a hold on himself. Their eyes connected, blue stared into green, until a sudden flash of blue appeared in the boy's eyes. The boy grimaced as he began pulling on something. To the hero's horror he saw the boy pulling something out of his arm, his cries of pain being silenced so that the villain wouldn't turn his head around to look at him. His stripes began to light up, a loud snapping noise being heard as the sound equivalent to a pen drop echoed through silence. The boy's eyes flashed a violent blue as sparks of energy began to come from the boy's fingertips. That got the villain's attention. The man reeled back his head in what looked like shock, giving All Might a moment of freedom. A child is showing more strength than I am. A child. The man has done things no one should have ever gone through. What kind of hero am I, if I don't do the same? The man yelled to himself as he pushed himself up to his feet, yellow sparks of electricity surrounding his fingertips, and he hesitantly took a step forward. He didn't care about the pain in his side, he didn't care about how his vision was swirling, he didn't care how this was most likely going to be his last punch. All he cared about was giving hope to this boy who had given him enough strength to stand up and fight. The villain edged closer to the boy, saying something that All Might couldn't understand, the boy's eyes widening slightly as he saw All Might approaching. The villain instinctively pulled his arms up to shield his face, a quirk creating a shield around his body to block the punch. All Might poured every last fiber of power into this punch. You took this boy away from his family. You took away his innocence. Have you no shame? The hero yelled as he tried to get past the defenses that the villain had created. The villain smiled. That finally sent All Might over the edge. This boy did nothing wrong but exist. You tortured him because you couldn't take what is rightfully his. Today is the last day that you will ever see the light of day. The hero yelled, reeling back his fist as he felt the wind between his fingers begin to compress around him. United. The hero yelled as he planted his left foot in front of him. States. The man's posture shifted forwards as his fist began to soar through the air, the wind pressure he was generating shattering the nearby windows of cars. The hero screamed as his fist was about to make contact with the field around the villain. Smaaaash. His fist smashed through the defenses the villain created, sounds of bones breaking as his fist made contact with the villain's face, his entire head crumpling around his hand as blood splattered around the man's arm. Two bodies crumpled to the floor as All Might looked at the boy in front of them, The man's vision was blaring, but he swore that he saw a sword made of blue light appeared in his hands, before his vision fully disappeared. The next thing the hero knew, he was waking up in a hospital after being in a coma for several days. The hero searched for months for the boy. There was no record of anyone seeing the boy, much less seeing where he went. The boy was lost to the wind, at least he was, because now, he finally found the boy who saved All Might's life. The boy who kept him from being worthless in a battle he was chosen to end. Young Hamato, I failed you once, I will never allow you to be failed again, the man said to himself as he continued to watch as the boy was smiling as he continued to destroy the robots. Watching as the young hero continued to warp around the city, saving and destroying in a way that made one for all thrill and excitement under Yaga's skin. We have quite a bountiful crop this year, some students using mobility to surpass the robots. The rodent overlord of Ua said as a close-up picture of a boy with glasses and short blue hair was shown on the big screen. Others using their surrounding to destroy robots. The screen shifted to show a boy with a tail destroying a lamppost and shaking a robot's head in. While others use raw power to destroy their enemies. The screen shifted once more to a girl with spiky blonde hair, standing on a pile of smoldering robots. But the true hero applicants that use all three, truly stand out from the pack. The mouse-bear-dog machination exclaimed cheerfully as the same green-haired boy showed up on the screen, as one of his swords was thrown into the chest of a robot, before appearing once more grasping his blade on the body of a dead robot. But of course, the true test has just begun, the mouse said as he pressed a big red button. 78, that's how many points he currently had by his rough calculations. He estimated himself to be ahead of the pack by now, so he should probably put on some slack for everyone else to get a chance. He stabbed his blade into the heart of the last robot he was going to destroy, spinning the katanas in his hand as he was about to sheath them on his back, when the ground beneath him began to rumble. An earthquake, he heard someone yell from behind him. No, this isn't an earthquake, earthquakes don't pick up in intensity, this is something else. Izuku responded, his grip tightening around his katana handles as its design began to glow blue. He had a really bad feeling about this. Then suddenly, the shaking stopped, several people sighed in relief, and then all hell broke loose. The ground split open right where several applicants were. Instantly Izuku threw one of his katanas to where the group of three were. Teleporting to blade mid-air, he spun around and slashed through the air. Before the three teenagers could blink, they felt the floor beneath them give out as they fell into a blue portal of the ninja boy's making. He blipped alongside the applicants he just saved, only to see a giant metal robot now emerging from the ground where he just was. He heard one of the hero hopefuls stutter out a thank you before running off. His eyes narrowed as he saw the destruction that was being caused by such a machine. Does Ua not know how to hold back? He inwardly yelled to himself as he lunged forward, watching as the giant's hand smashed into the earth, creating a shockwave that sent several people flying backwards. As he ran forward, he saw several people begin to run away from the machine. He couldn't blame him, as that's what he would have done if he didn't see everyone who needed help. He disappeared in a flash of blue, reappearing as he grabbed onto another test taker's wrist and yanking him forward into the portal, only to reappear with the crowd running away. His eyes frantically darted across the opening. To many people to get to safety, he needed to something about the giant robot. He grit his teeth as he realized what he had to do. He began an all-out sprint to the robot, getting several shouts in return as he neared the robot. Once he about 10 meters away, he stabbed his sword into the ground, and began to run in a large circle around the robot. The metal behemoth looked wearily at Izuku, before attempting to slam its giant metal fist on Izuku's body. He narrowed his eyes as he breathed deep. This was gonna beep. He slid under the robot's punch, making sure his sword kept dragging on the ground behind him as he continued to run in a circle. He was about halfway there. He could do this. He will do this. He grit his teeth harder as he narrowed his brow. This needs an insane amount of concentration. The larger the portal, the harder it was to create, and he was about to make the biggest portal he ever attempted. He slid under another punch before flipping on his chest as he slipped sideways into the air, rotating swords scratching the ground as he continued on his path. He ducked under one last punch before coming to a sudden stop as he connected the scratch lines together, a small grin on his face as he slammed his sword deep into the ground. Adios amigo. he said as he pushed his sword forward. A bright blue circle surrounded the robot as it began to fall through the portal. The machine attempting to save itself, grabbing onto a building, failing and dragging both itself and a piece of the building with him. Only it wasn't just the building he was dragging with him. The body of someone was writhing through the air, screaming as they began to fall through the sky. "Damn it!" Izuku yelled as he flung his left katana into the air, watching as the sword expertly flew through the air right towards the person. Sweat poured down the boy's face as he clenched his fist, feeling the sensation of his sword hilt in his grasp. He flipped in the air, grabbing into the boy's shirt and flipped him onto his back as he clenched his other hand, blinking back to where he was before. He pulled back the sword that was in the ground, closing the portal as he collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily as he felt the boy on his back get off, saying something about they didn't need his help. The boy sported a smug look as he returned to the group of people. Izuku didn't have the energy to respond as he heard a giant crash in the nearby woods, wincing slightly at the loud noise. Let's hope Ua wasn't upset about this, right? Right? Meanwhile, in the teacher's lounge, no one said a word as they watched the boy run around the robot. Aizawa's intellectual gaze resting on the boy as he dodged and weaved around the robot, dragging his sword behind him. As he was about to say something about the boy being reckless, he saw the boy come to a halt as he stabbed his katana into the ground. This got his attention as he saw the boy's arm push forward. A collective gasp being heard from the school board, the metal behemoth beginning to fall through the portal. Another young hero hopeful fell through the air, only to be saved by the same boy who created the portal. The zero-pointer fell through another portal that opened just into the nearby school forest. For quick thinking, the plan wasn't half bad. It was logical to assume no one would be in that forest area, but Aizawa believed a better point would have been far away from the campus itself, unless he had a range that was maxed out. If so, then that was something he would have to work on with the boy. He knew full well that the boy was getting into the hero's course, even without the dozens of rescue points he racked up, and he knew the mouse overlord he had the displeasure to call his boss would assign the problem child to his homeroom. "So, I assume we know who the number 1 applicant this year is?" Nimari asked as she snapped out of her stupor, turning away from the screen to see a truly horrifying sight. The mouse was smiling. "Indeed, Ms. Midnight, I believe it is safe to assume he has the number 1 spot, especially since he has both more villain points and rescue points than anyone else. He didn't even have to use another one of his weapons. I'm quite curious as to what his other abilities are," the bear thing said as he looked at the teachers. "Wait, Nezu doesn't even know what this boy's quirk can do!" Quote, was the collective thought among the teachers. Should the zero-pointer be doing that? The number 1 hero asked in his sunken form, pointing at a camera that was showing a picture of the robot that was teleported outside of the bounds, glowing yellow before expanding and getting back up. A slamming noise was being heard as Nezu was now jumping in the red button, before collecting himself and fixing his suit. "Ahem, it appears the robot is loose. I suggest you handle this, Toshinori." The hero's eyes fell, giving everyone the unspoken answer to the question, "You used your 3 hours already." One of the teachers spoke out, Aizawa's thought on the matter. "How did this blonde buffoon already spend his daily limit? It's not even noon yet." Up in the commentator's booth, the hero known as Present Mike was tearing with his mouth touching the floor, unaware that time had already passed as all the zero-pointers began to shut off. It took him another minute to calm his nerves before speaking into the microphone he always kept on hand. "All right, listeners," he yelled into his mic, gaining everyone's as he began to yell, "that concludes the physical portion of the exam. Please stand by for anyone who needs medical attention. Help is on the way." The voice hero spoke as he used some of his quirk to make his voice even louder. And then he saw the explosion. Another robot was on the horizon in zone number 4, the same zone that he disappeared from, busting through a set of walls as it began to create destruction. "Whoa, what the heck is happening in City 4? Nezu shut down th." The hero got cut off as Nezu screamed into his intercom, "We're trying. The robot's gone rouge." The rodent screamed as he cut off the intercom, making the voice hero feel useless as all he could do was watch as a blue sword flew through the air straight towards the giant behemoth. "Kid, I really hope you know what you're doing." He had no idea what he was doing, First he was just trying to catch his breath as everyone began to crowd around him. Then he heard Present Mike scream out that the physical exam was over, and then everything's went to chaos. The robot he did everything he could to make sure no one got hurt, was now back, only it was bigger, stronger and also more yellowier. He made sure everyone was out of the way as the Metal Titan worked its way through the mock city, only to see it wasn't stopping and decided to continue to the next one. And the next thing he knew, he was flying into the air, flowing his swords in front of him to keep him in the air. He didn't have a plan, he didn't even have the morsel that could be considered an idea at the point. His body moved before he could think, his stripes glowing bright blue as he blinked through the air. He was about 200 meters away from the robot as it reached the next mock city, kicking its leg forward as it created a large explosion as it destroyed part of the walls surrounding Mock City 3. Izuku then realized what he had to do. He threw one last katana into the air, before feeling the family grasp of his handle in his hand. He closed his eyes as his stripes began to dim down, before his swords completely disappeared. He opened his eyes once more, his eyes flashing red as red lightning wrapped around his fingertips, the astral form of Sai's swords forming in his hands. He was about 200 meters from the ground, and by his rough estimate the zero-pointer stood at around 70 meters, he saw as the machine was about to walk through the gap it was creating. He spun the newly created Sai in his hands, his fingers now between the larger blades. He was now 125 meters above the ground. He slammed his fists together as a red energy began to encase his hands, before spreading around his entire body. The mass of energy began to rapidly expand before he reached the ground, side-flipping as he landed in the iconic superhero landing, his total height now being around 48 meters, his maximum height was about 60 meters, he needed to push past that limit if he wanted to make sure everyone was going to be okay. Clearly whoever they had stationed at Ua didn't have the firepower to destroy this robot, so it was up to him. This didn't count as vigilante work, right? His steps were large as his mass continued to increase in size, slowly going from 55 to 59, then 60, then 63, before using everything he had to get to his new maximum size, 68 meters, just too shorter than the metal monstrosity that was now stepping into the new zone. Izuku reached out his left hand onto the robot's shoulder, pulling him back as he reeled his right fist back, before slamming his fist into the robot's face, sending the metal monster back several steps. Izuku lunged forward to the offensive as he tried to use this to completely destroy the robot, only instead of hitting the robot again in the face, he felt nothing as he saw the zero-pointer land a haymaker on Izuku's astro-form chin. He felt his head violently jerked upwards as he felt his body fly through the air. Almost instantly he regained his bearing, and executed a spin flip as he twisted 180 degrees and landing in a crouch pose. "All right, Metal Man, come and get some," the boy yelled as he reeled back his right arm, pushing as much energy as he could into his right arm, increasing its size drastically as it seized around before growing 3 times the size. He pushed his hand forward as he shifted his body height towards the robot, smiling as he remembered his master words. "You need a battle cry," the rat man said as he sipped on his bowl of soup that he prepared for both himself and student. "A battle cry? Why would I need that?" Izuku asked as he brought the bowl near to his lips. "Sometimes you need the extra push in an attack. Why do you think All Might always screams smash before he lands a strike?" The rat replied back, inhaling the steam from his soup as he took another sip. The boy's eyes lit up as he began to think, "I've got it." He yelled excitedly as he took a sip of his soup, his eyes going wide as he spit out the soup into the mat. "Ah, hot soup. Hatsu fatsu 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 fatsu." The boy yelled as he began to drink water to cool his mouth. The master pulled down on his single whisker. I can't say I've heard that one before, certainly unique." The boy stutters as he tried to correct himself but failing terribly as his master insisted. This was his battle cry. "This one's for you, Splints." He yelled inside of his form. Hot, the boy's large fist made contact to the top of the Titan's head, feeling the crushing power in his hand as he began to crush the robot. "Suup," the boy yelled with all his might, pushing down as the robot began to combust from the inside out. Explosions riding formed the core of the robot, before stopping its glow and falling to the ground in a heap of rubble. The boy looked down to ensure that the robot was KO'd, kicking the ruble until he was satisfied, and powered down his astro form, falling to the ground as he felt every last bit of energy leave his body, leaving him barely able to stand as he created a sword, and disappeared into a portal. The sound of a pen drop could be heard as no one dared to break the silence, until the sound that gave everyone fear broke the silence. Manic laughter was coming from the dog in a suit as he gripped onto his cup as tea began to splatter from its sides. "Oh, that was quite entertaining," the rodent said as he fondly sipped his tea, inwardly laughing even harder at the stupefied looks that his teachers had pleased him much more than he would let anyone know. "Nezu." Aizawa finally broke the silence. For the first time in his life of being a teacher, he was surprised beyond what he thought possible, his eyes wider than they had since he won the sports festival all those years ago. "What kind of problem child is that?" He sighed, pointing to where the screen kept showing a replay of the boy in his giant red form, landing the final blow with his enlarged fists. "Oh, Aizawa, have you already designated your problem child? How do you know Vlad doesn't? Take him, I'm not dealing with that," the other teacher in question says as he points to where it showed the boy flying through the air, before free-falling 200 meters into the ground, and then creating a form of red around himself. "Of course, I'm sure Aizawa doesn't mind, do you, Shota?" the sophisticated rodent asked as he sipped his tea. The man sighed as he shook his head, muttering something about problem child already making his life hard. Meanwhile, All Might couldn't draw his eyes away, his thoughts consuming him as he watched as the boy displayed two separate abilities, both radically different. That ability, it's incredible. With that power, he could potentially become one of the greatest heroes to ever live. The man thought to himself, before a feeling of dread washed over him. What would All for One do with a quirk like that? Could Japan even have a chance against him? He silently said a prayer of gratitude that couldn't be truly given with enough care, that All for One couldn't steal the boy's quirk, but the question still remained. What else could he do? Time skip brought to you by Nezu. Watching you read this, Fear the Rat, 2 weeks later. And with a total of 120 rescue points, that brings your total score of 207 points. Congratulations, young Hamato, and welcome to your Hero Academia. The holographic image of All Might said, reaching out his hand to symbolize his acceptance to Ua. The boy in question looked at the screen with a small smile on his face, a single tear running down his face, a shuriken dancing between his fingers as he looked over to a photo sitting on his desk. A woman with bright green hair and eyes smiled brightly in the photo. I did it, Mom. I made it to the starting line," the boy said as he stood up, looking behind him as he threw his arm back before swinging it forward, letting the throwing star fly through the air before stabbing into a photo pinned to the wall. "And I promise, that man will soon pay for what he did to you. And I'll make sure he never hurts anyone else ever again," the boy finished as he left the room, the reflection on the ninja star showing a photo of a man wearing a black mask and suit, handing over a young girl with white hair and a small horn to a man in a bird mask. "And that's a promise I intend to keep." Chapter text. Running. That was something that Izuku Midoriya knew very well, and at this moment he was running as fast as he could. His strides were long as he desperately darted his eyes around every last detail that was before him. The hallway was completely barren, made up only of thick concrete that the boy had no hope of breaking though. Glancing back behind him, he saw the darkness chasing after him. His heart was pounding in his ears as he pushed his body to its limits. As if he had eyes in the back of his head, Izuku felt a creeping sense of danger in his gust as he immediately acted. Shifting his weight to his right side, he pushed off his right foot with everything he had. Going into one of the sloppiest roll dodges anyone had ever seen, he saw a glimpse of something red and black. Izuku's widened green eyes showed nothing but panic and fear as the unknown object changed direction midair and was heading right towards the boy. Pushing his body up, he managed to get past the next projectiles with only a deep scratch on his shoulder. Izuku couldn't worry about the pain he was feeling now, he would worry about the blood later. All that mattered now was finding the exit. He could feel the presence of evil right behind him as he ran down hall after hall, managing to keep just out of the man's reach. His scarred arms burned at the motion of pumping his arms so much, his breathing was erratic as he was reaching his limit. "Oh, you poor boy," he heard a voice behind him say, as he felt a sharp pain in his two shoulders. The sudden pain brought him to an abrupt halt, making him face plant into the hard floor. He felt something inside his body expand as he was lifted off the ground. Beams of red and black energy were sticking out of him as the boy desperately tried to free himself from the man's hold. The boy's face was constricted as he tried not to focus on the pain that was coming from his shoulders as he had several spikes going through his body. "Did you really believe you could escape this place?" "Escape me?" the man in a black striped suit said as he floated in the air, red and black energy coming from his fingers as he landed gracefully in front of the boy. "Here's the truth, Deku. You will never escape this place, and eventually you will break, and then you'll be mine," the man said, leaning in front of the boy's face, with a smile that would give the most evil of people nightmares. Izuku glared up at the man, his emerald eyes flashing red briefly as he desperately tried to call upon his quirk that was being suppressed. "My name is Izuku Midoriya," Izuku yelled, pulling his head back, before slamming his head as hard as he could into the man's face, a sickening crunch being heard as the boy suddenly felt himself getting dizzy. In an instant Izuku felt his body go limp as he was slammed into the ceiling. Black began to swirl in his vision as he fell to the ground. "Damn brat," the villain said, tentatively lifting his fingers to his face. "Kurogiri, pick up the child and make sure he's securely restrained this time," the man said as he held his nose, another crunch being heard as he reset the bone. With that, a black mist began to surround the two as the boy began to fall into the endless void, his vision failing as he distantly heard a loud beeping noise. Wait, beeping noise. Green eyes opened as his breathing was erratic, his emerald eyes darting across the unfamiliar room. The blanket he had on his body felt soft, gripping that tightly. He began to calm down. A cold sweat covered his entire body as he focused on the beeping coming from his right. The alarm he set last night was currently blaring its head off as it completed its task of waking up its owner. Izuku slammed his hand on the alarm, effectively shutting it off as he let out a soft sigh of relief. Groaning slightly, Izuku pulled himself up and out of bed, his hands working meticulously as he made himself a bowl of cereal and began to eat it with little passion. His mind was elsewhere. His eyes landed on the small picture he had on the table. A green-haired woman smiled brightly as he held her troublesome son. They both had green hair and eyes. This was one of the few pictures Izuku had gotten of his mother, being taken only a month before his world turned upside down and he lost everything. Slurping down the last bit of cereal, Izuku made his way to the bathroom. His eyes landed on the scarred body the full mirror showed. The scars on his shoulder blades suddenly felt hot. Instinctively he gently rubbed at the tougher tissue, grimacing slightly at the phantom pain shooting through his body at the memory. Izuku didn't pay the memory any more attention as he saw the other scars that littered his body, his fingers grazing over one of many that would have killed just about anyone else. Sometimes he wondered what if that injury would have finished him off. What horrors would he have been saved from? But that was an idea that didn't matter. There was no point of thinking what if these days anymore. It happened, and it gave him fuel to always push forward. Putting on a muscle shirt, Izuku grabbed one of the many shuriken that littered the tables of his small apartment that he was currently living in. Flipping the small weapon between his fingers, Izuku stared blankly at the wall, his thoughts focusing on the upcoming first day of Uwa, which according to his clock, would be happening in about 4 hours. Izuku sighed as he flipped the metal star between his fingers one last time, flinging his wrist forward one as he sent the ninja star through the air, striking the wall on a picture of a pale blue-haired man. Izuku's green eyes narrowed as he grabbed the picture of the green-haired woman. Izuku's eyes held what looked like sadness, remembering one of the last good memories he had with her before everything changed. An 8-year-old Izuku was wrestling against his mother's grasp as he held onto a small blue katana that he managed to summon. "Izuku, hold still," his mother whisper shouted, struggling to hold onto her son as she tried to take a picture of the two of them. "But Moon, I wanna use my quirk again," the young Izuku cried out, his small sword sparking with blue electricity as the sword was waved in the air. "Izuku, please just hold still," Inko called out, smiling brightly as Izuku still resisted his mother's embrace. A small sad smile found its way on Izuku's face. The now 18-year-old looked fondly at the photo, wishing that he had more time with her, instead of being violently ripped away from her and everyone else. Blue electricity cracked between the boy's fingertips, his eyes begging to glow a brilliant lapis color as the stripes on his arms mirrored the color. The form of a sword slowly began to blink into existence, a bright flash of blue as Izuku now held tightly onto the sword, summoning another identical sword in his other hand. He took a stance. His right foot was behind him and his left was in front, the boy's eyes still blue as they shined like a star. Izuku's hands were raised, his blades effortlessly slicing through the air as Izuku twisted on the balls of his feet, twisting around 180 degrees as he slashed down once again. The boy's movements were smooth and showed great skill, his concentration absolute as he performed several more maneuvers in the small living room of his apartment. The blue lightning began to slowly crackle away as a red energy began to flow around the boy's hands and eyes. The image of katanas disappearing in a flash of blue as Izuku twirled something red in his hands, blue eyes changing to a bright red as his stripes followed suit. Now holding onto the much shorter sei, Izuku twirled them once more as he shifted his weight to his left foot as he twisted his body forward, kicking the air. Once Izuku's foot landed on the ground, Izuku immediately bent down low as he jumped into the air, tucking his legs together as he effortlessly flipped behind him. Izuku's eyes were still red as he twirled the small daggers in his hands, before sheathing them on his hips as he took a deep breath. Crossing his feet, Izuku sat on the wooden floor, his heart rate was calm and steady as he lifted his arms just above his waist. Taking another deep breath, Izuku calmed his mind as he felt the power just beneath his fingertips, the energy almost begging to be used and unleashed. Izuku breathed deeply into his nostrils, calming the power just beneath the skin as he calmed himself completely. Closing his eyes, Izuku saw a raging sea of pure unbridled energy, making its way towards him as it desperately tried to force the boy to unleash it. At one point Izuku would have complied, and just allowed the power to burst from him until he had nothing left. Only Izuku didn't bend to the power's will, instead he forced the power to submit to his control, taming it to a much more manageable tranquil state. Izuku softly smiled as he opened his eyes, his hands sparking with red electricity as he held onto his sei, before releasing his hold and saw the weapons disappear right before his very eyes in a flash of red. Damn it, he muttered to himself, seeing that he had barely meditated for more than 30 seconds. I really need to get better at this, Izuku mused to himself. Izuku's eyes returned to their normal green as he took one last deep breath, standing up as he looked at the clock once more. He had about 3 hours to kill before he had to be in class. You know, I really should have thought about what I was going to do until class, Izuku said to himself as he decided to just go for a run while he waited for the time to trickle by. He put on his shoes as he began to run around his new neighborhood. Izuku saw several other people already out and working out just like him. His pace was fast as he felt the cool breeze flow against his skin, the smell of the ocean filling his nostrils before the stench of literal garbage filled his nose. Izuku's gaze lingered on the literal mountains of trash that made up Takoba Municipal Beach Park. Izuku visibly cringed at the sight, his finger twitching as a plan came to him. Izuku smirked to himself as his eyes flashed red as he began to walk into the dump of a beach. He did say he would have time to kill, didn't he? What better way to entertain yourself while also helping the community? That was something his master had often told him when he forced his students to partake in community service for the less fortunate. Making his way to where he could somewhat see the sand below the piles of garbage, Izuku cracked his neck as he rolled his shoulders, until stopping short as he heard noises of something moving around. A small smile on his face as he inched closer to the beach. I'm probably going to regret this. An electric blonde has looking in the mirror with a goofy smile as he styled his hair. Today was a very important day. Today was the day that all his hard work paid off. Today was the first day of Kaminari Denki's hero career. Being accepted into the most prestigious hero school in all of Japan would have definitely made his parents proud, at least it would have if they were literally anyone else. Electro and Grid were his parents' names, or more accurately the names of the notorious electrical villains that terrorized the east side of Japan for several months until their eventual capture. Kaminari grew up with his aunt, a woman who always wanted kids but never found anyone special enough to marry. Still, Kaminari had doubts that he could do this. Sure, he put sweat and tears into accomplishing his dream,
but he also has the blood of villains coursing through his veins.
Kaminari shook his head as he smiled into the mirror, his signature smile as he did finger guns, his eyes shining yellow for a brief moment as he stared at his reflection. Without any more delay, the boy grabbed his backpack he packed the night before, making sure that he had all his books and batteries in case he accidentally fries his brain again. Kaminari hummed as he zipped his backpack up, slinging it across his shoulders as he entered the living room, smiling brightly at the only mother figure in his life. "Aunt Deanna," he said happily, slipping into his seat at the dining table. The older woman in question smiled warmly at her nephew, ruffling his hair lightly as it stayed upright in the air. She gave him an amused look as he fixed his hair. Her quirk, which she named friction storage, allowed her to store a certain amount of kinetic electricity in her body. However, unlike her nephew, she couldn't discharge the build of electricity without a conductor. "Hey Denk, did you sleep well?" she asked, placing a plate full of breakfast in front of him, patting his back as she turned back into the kitchen. The blond boy hummed as he took a big bite of the American-style pancakes she made, a bright smile on his face as he nodded enthusiastically. Well as I could at least," Kaminari offered with a goofy look on his face as he poured more syrup over his food. His aunt smiled at his antics, beginning to clean up the kitchen, which was currently a mess from when she made the pancakes. Feeling something soft brush against his leg, Kaminari instinctively looked down, only to see the orange cat his aunt had sheltered several years ago. The cat's name was Outlet. Apparently the cat a quirk that allowed them to actually absorb any electrical energy and turn it into pure adrenaline, making the cat a literal gremlin when he absorbed enough electricity. Kaminari's fingers sparked softly as he rubbed between the cat's ears, hearing the purr as the cat eagerly leaned into the blonde's touch. "Are you nervous?" his aunt suddenly asked, wiping down a counter with a towel as she watched the interaction between nephew and cat. "Thought me nervous, PFF'd," Kaminari said, shrugging his shoulders as he smiled, but his act wasn't fooling his aunt, who just looked at him with a deadpan expression. She raised her eyebrow lightly as the two stared at each other for what seemed like longer than it really was. The boy sighed in defeat as his shoulders slumped, his eyes falling slightly as his vulnerable side was on full display. "Am I that transparent?" Kaminari asked, looking up again as his fingers twitched with a yellow spark, a nervous tick of his. His aunt smiled reassuringly, walking closer to him as she placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, squeezing it softly. "It's okay to nervous. I'm sure most of your classmates are just as nervous, if not more nervous than you are right now," she softly spoke. "Yeah." Kaminari's eyes hung low as he twiddled his fingers together. "But they probably don't have villains for parents," he said, looking away as the gremlin they had of a cat made his way into his lap. Kaminari's fingers instinctively began to play with the cat's soft fur, the low purr grounding his emotions as he looked back at his aunt. Deanna smiled softly, her hands going down to his as she held them tightly. "Denki, just because your parents were villains, doesn't mean you can't be a hero yourself." His aunt softly began, petting the cat herself as it softly meowed in pleasure. "You'll never be like your parents, because you have something they didn't." Her right hand released his hand as she pointed to his chest, poking it gently. "You've got the heart of a hero. Just ask that girl you saved in the entrance exam if you don't believe me," she kindly offered, her smile still strong as she heard the boy sniffle softly, his eyes hidden from hers. In an instant Aunt Deanna felt two arms wrap around her tightly, pulling her closer as he hurried his head into her neck. "Why, you're really good at these pep talks," Kaminari softly said as he slowly pulled away from the embrace. His smile was genuine as he wiped away the few tears that streamed down his face, his bright attitude back in full effect as he looked at his aunt in gratitude. She smiled, ruffling his hair again. "You don't become a pediatrician without picking up a few things, sweetheart," Deanna said as she stood back up, taking away Kaminari's plate with her. "Why is that your answer to everything?" Kaminari cheekily asked with a smile, felling the cat beginning to go unstable as he wrestled around with his hand. "Also, Outlet's beginning to enter gremlin mode," Kaminari warned, gently picking up the cat that was currently in the process of becoming a being of pure chaos. Deanna's sweat dropped at the news. "Already? I was hoping we'd get to noon before he unleashed his power." Kaminari laughed as he gingerly placed the cat on the dining table, its once brown eyes beginning to glow a bright yellow as it got into a pounce position. Kaminari's eyes widened as the cat suddenly leapt forward, barely missing Kaminari's head by an inch as he quickly ducked down. "Wow! Watch out!" Denki yelled, laughing already being used to the cat's antics. "Quick! Grab the catnip!" Kaminari called out as he stood up, trying to catch the little gremlin. His aunt grabbed the giant wooden spoon and aimed it dangerously at her nephew.
"Don't you ever joke about that, we'd create a monster I don't think even All Might could beat." Deanna yelled as she tried to grab a hold of the cat. The cat jumped up into the air as it grabbed a hold of Kaminari's face and began to hug him to death, his little paws digging into the sides of his face as it hung on for dear life. "Ah, get him off!" Kaminari yelled as he involuntarily crackled with electricity on his hands, accidentally touching the cat.
With a sharp meow, the cat went flying off the boy's head, soaring through the air as it crashed into the microwave that was left open. No one moved, too scared of the cat as they heard electricity cracking coming from the microwave. "I'm gonna be late for school, aren't I?" Kaminari asked as he saw the being of pure unbridled chaos and destruction standing before them. "Most likely." Deanna agreed, her wooden spoon armed like a sword as she bravely faced against the gremlin that was sometimes their house cat. Miraculously, the cat gremlin managed to calm down after only 10 minutes and very minimum property damage.
Kaminari looked at the cat, currently being the most calm and adorable cat in existence, not even daring to pet him goodbye. He hugged his aunt as he made his way to the door. "Good luck, Dank," Deanna called after the embrace ended. Kaminari smiled brightly, his blonde hair flowing in the non-existent wind. "Who needs luck? I conquered a demon cat. I'm invincible," Kaminari called out as he closed the door behind him. Kaminari laughed as he shook his head, taking out his phone as he saw that he somehow was still on schedule to make it to class on time. He smiled as he remembered the entrance exam, when he successfully grounded himself and shot off like a human lightning bolt, which technically he was. He wondered if the green-haired boy he met at the entrance made it in. He remembered that the boy said he could teleport with the swords on his back, which was so freaking cool.
Yanaki Hamato, if he remembered correctly. He was hoping to get his number after the practical exam.
But apparently something happened with one of the 0-pointers in his zone and another, and he just disappeared after flashing away in a blip of blue. He had another friend in that zone, and apparently Hamato pulled off an epic save earlier, making a 0-pointer disappear entirely, until it reappeared bigger and badder. Kaminari decided not to try and think about that event. It would probably cause a lot more headaches than it was worth.
His black shoes pounded against the sidewalk as he neared the subway station, his heart pounding as he tried to imagine what today would hold for him. After making it onto the train, he sat down as slumped his backpack against his side as he pulled out his phone, looking at the local news network. The first headline he saw was actually on the rogue robot. Apparently the story made headlines, especially when that red dude came out of nowhere as completely totaled the tin can. After hearing the doors close, he looked up when he heard someone sit in front of him. His body went stiff when he instantly recognized her. Purple hair, earphone jacks and a pretty face. This was the girl he saved at the entrance exam. "Okay. Just play it cool, just play it cool, you got this, Kaminari," he thought to himself as he took a deep breath, preparing himself for the upcoming conversation. "Hey Jax," Kaminari said with a smile, instantly getting her attention as she looked at him for a moment. Recognition flashing in her black eyes. Her earphone jacks were currently plugged into her phone. He saw as she slowly disconnected her jacks from her phone as she looked at him with an analytical gaze. "Bolt," she said, a small smirk on her face as she crossed her arms. "Bolt?" Kaminari asked, clearly not expecting that answer. She shrugged her shoulder as she pointed at his hair, more specifically the back lightning bolt. "Had to call you something. Blonde guy didn't sound as good," she answered. "Besides, it's not like calling me Jax as creative." She followed up, twirling her earphone jack around her finger. That's fair." Kaminari consented, rubbing the back of his neck as he looked at her. "Let's try this again. I'm Kaminari Denki," the electric user offered, his hand outstretched to her. She had an amused look on her face. "Jiro Kyoka," she answered, accepting his handshake. "So what, are you following me or something, Bolt?" she teased, a smirk on her face as she leaned back, Her arms crossed over her chest.
What? Kaminari said, his eyes going wide as his brain reset. Sure he likes girls, sure he maybe shot his shot every time he saw the opportunity, but he wasn't stalker. And no, Kaminari answered, still flustered from her question. She gave him an amused expression, before beginning to laugh at his reaction. Kaminari's heart stopped beating for exactly 2 seconds. He had never heard a laugh like hers before, and so help him, he was gonna hear it again.
Kaminari slowly began to regain his confidence as he smiled and laughed as well. What makes you think I'd follow you? Isn't it entirely possible that we both live in the same area? Kaminari asked with a smile. She hummed thoughtfully, crossing her legs as she stared at him. Suppose so. So which class you got Bolt? Jiro asked, changing the conversation after getting her fun.
What? How do you know I made it into UA? He asked. She just shook her head and smiled, her eyes darting down to his uniform. Oh, right, Kaminari said with a chuckle. The heroics course, Class 1A, what about you? He asked. She smiled as she shook her head. Looks like we're classmates Bolt. She chuckled, watching as the train doors opened once more, gesturing to the door as she grabbed her bag. Looks like it's our stop, she said as she stood up, waiting for Kaminari to join her.
Sweet, someone I already know is in my classroom.
Kaminari happily said, walking in sync with her as he smiled brightly. So, what's your quirk? He asked, generally interested in her jacks. It's nothing special really, it's just these. Jiro said as she raised her jacks into the ear, wiggling them slightly to emphasize her statement. I've got enhanced hearing, and I can create sound waves based on my own heartbeat. She answered, I assume you've got some type of electrical type. She asked. Yeah, how did you? Oh. Kaminari said, remembering that not only did she see him to the entrance exams, but he also had a literal lightning bolt in his hair. I can generate electricity from anywhere on my body, but if I use too much, I fry my brain. Kaminari offered, turning the corner as the building of UA was now in view. Fry your brain, so what, you get even stupider than you are now. She teased, a smirk on her face. Hey, she was many things, a hothead, a stubborn bitch and maybe even a little insane, but she wasn't one to quit. Which was why Katsumi Bakugo begrudgingly began to put on the UA school uniform. There were 3 things that could easily be known about the girl. She was strong, confident, and in no means a girl who appreciated the softness most girls had. When she was younger she refused to wear dresses or skirts, only wearing them when her mother forced her to. Thankfully in her old high school, Aldera, the teachers were lenient about the school's dress code, so she got away with wearing pants. Apparently UA had a much stricter school dress code, and such she was now staring at the article of clothing like it just insulted her very being, which to her it very well might have.
She grumbled something incoherent, undoubtedly an amount of curses that could make a sailor blush. She hated how the flowing skirt hung to her hips, of the fact that her top was stupidly snug. Hell, she even hated the stockings she was also given. She looked like one of those anime schoolgirls who would have a crush on their senpai or some shit. She let out an audible groan as she released a few sparks of anger from her palms. Her red ruby eyes staring at her reflection, her spiky blonde hair styled in a ponytail as she once again grumbled. She knew that she couldn't not wear this, which was exactly the problem. She didn't like to show her femininity, much to her mother's dismay, but she only ever saw that side of her as weak, so she locked it away somewhere deep inside her mind. The only person who had ever succeeded in making her show parts of that side was her childhood best friend who was taken from her a decade ago. No one believed her that he was taken by a man in a black suit, disappearing in a black mist and vanished out of thin air. Well, almost no one, her parents believed her. She still had nightmares about that day. She always kept wondering if she had managed to get up, if she had managed to unleash her quirk, the quirk she was always praised for. She sighed as she forcefully pulled her gaze away from the full-body mirror, her school backpack already back as she walked over to her nightstand. A single picture frame stood on it. A picture of 2 young kids happily hugging each other with a smile on both of their faces. Katsumi picked up the photo and smiled softly at the photo. It was one of her mother favorites, considering this was one of the few examples she actually smiled in a photo. Her lips curved upward slightly as she remembered that day well. It was only a few months before Izuku was taken from her. See, come on, Kachan. Mama S says that we need to smile. Her red eyes stared defiantly at her friend, her arms crossed as she ignored his whines, a small smirk on her face as he tried to bargain with her. No way, Zuzu. Why do you even want me to smile so much? She asked with an eyebrow raised, getting in his face as he became flustered. He stuttered as he smiled sheepishly, the 8-year-old muttering something that she couldn't hear. She gently flicked his forehead. I couldn't hear you, nerd. She replied, getting a sheepish look in his eyes as he spoke louder this time. Because, when you smile, you look as pretty as a butterfly. Her eyes went wide as her face flushed a slight pink as she grabbed him by the shoulders, ignoring the strange looks her mother was giving her as she pulled him into a hug. All right. Smile, Zuzu. She said after a moment, smiling as she felt the literal sun beaming beside her, and for some reason, her heart felt like it was beating faster as she thought about his words. She placed the photo back on her nightstand, slinging her backpack over her shoulders before glancing one more time at the photo. She walked back to her nightstand before grabbing the hairpin that she kept right beside the photo, a red butterfly with green accents she got as a birthday present from him one year. This was the only real girly thing she had in her room. She rarely wore it, but maybe today was a day that she should, she thought to herself as she relented and placed the hairpin in her hair. Adjusting it slightly, she glanced at her mirror one last time, grumbling about the damn uniform again before making her way downstairs. Her eyes fell upon the younger pictures of her from when she was just a brat, some even having her other half as her mother used to call Izuku. Eventually she made her way to the kitchen counter as she sat down on one of the stools she often sat on for breakfast or homework. She saw as her father smiled at her, his smile being warm as he placed a bowl of porridge before her. Morning, kitty cat. Her father said, pressing a soft beep to her forehead as she involuntarily smiled slightly to his words and touch. So she was a daddy's girl, sue her. Did you sleep well? He asked, noticing the butterfly hairpin as he affectionately rubbed her hair as he took his own bowl of breakfast, sitting beside her as they waited for the fast family member of the Bakugo household. Sure, she answered, taking a bite of her food, smiling again as she realized her dad had put an unorthodox amount of chilies into her bowl. Her father hummed with a smile, taking a bite of his equally spicy porridge. Most people thought Katsumi got her love for spicy foods from her equally brash and hot-headed mother. In reality, her mother absolutely despised anything spicier than a sweetened jalapeno. What was a sweetened jalapeno? Hell if she knew. You look really pretty, sweetheart. Her father said with a smile, his gaze setting on his daughter as he admired how much of a young woman she turned into over the years. She inherited her mother's looks to a T, her body being a mirror image from her mother's, even inheriting her red ruby eyes that Masaru first fell in love with all those years ago. He smiled, remembering the times when he and his wife first met. It was definitely a story he liked to share, considering how improbable the whole night was that led to their meeting. Thanks. I guess. Katsumi sharply said, keeping her face form view as she hoped her reddened cheeks went visible. She felt a comforting hand on her back. Looking up, she saw her father giving her the dorky grin that always made her feel at ease. Oi brat. I hope you're actually wearing the, oh, never mind. Her mother suddenly said, entering the room as she looked through her purse, grabbing her car keys as she quickly beeped her husband on the lips, making Katsumi groan at the action. Shut up, you'll understand one day. Her mother teased, ruffling up her hair before spotting the hair clip, avoiding that section of her hair entirely. Come on, finish up your food and I'll drop you off. Mitsuki Bakugo said as she sat down next to her husband, pulling out her phone as she looked at whatever she thought was interesting enough to read. Don't tell me what to do. Katsumi grumbled, her usually bite and attitude being restrained more than usual, something that Mitsuki saw and decided not to comment on right now. Eventually Katsumi finished her meal, standing up with a huff and placing her bowl in the sink as she grabbed her bag once more. Before she could leave, she was pulled into a hug by her father. She wasn't used to hugs, she never initiated them, so she only got them when her parents gave them to her. Don't forget, I'm proud of you. Her father, Masaru Bakugo said, beeping the top of her forehead and letting her go. She offered a small smile, something she had been doing more of since putting on that hair clip. See you later, sweetheart. Mitsuki added, beeping her husband once again, much to the annoyance of Katsumi. Soon the two found themselves sitting in one of the two cars the family owned, Katsumi sitting in the passenger seat as she gazed out the window, watching as the many houses began to fly past them. Excited? Mitsuki asked, gaining her daughter's attention.
Katsumi scoffed, like that was a question that needed an answer.
How about nervous? She followed up, making Katsumi's train of thought derail in an instant. Her head whipped around to look at her mother with an offended look on her face. What the hell? What type of shitty question is that? She demanded, looking at her mother expectingly for an answer. Mitsuki smiled to herself before yelling back. Don't talk back to me. I just wanted to know if you felt nervous about your first day.
Beep no, I'm not nervous about some shitty school, or their beeping dress code that I currently want to rip off my body and burn. Katsumi immediately shot back, oh don't get snippy with me young lady. Where's that shit of UA being the best hero school in all of Japan? Mitsuki retorted as she turned the car, the building of UA now able to be seen in the distance.
Just because it's the best school for heroics, don't mean shit when their dress code beeps. Katsumi grumbled, pulling on her skirt, trying to make it longer than it already was. You'll do just fine, and as much as I don't like it, remember your reasons to be a hero when you feel like something is in your way. Mitsuki calmly said, glancing over at her daughter as it looked like gears were turning in the girl's head. An image of the boy she once knew flashed in her head. He was the reason why she wanted to be a hero.
Sure, she had always known she was going to be a hero, but upon his disappearance, she had grown in her views of heroes. At one point in her life, she thought the power of someone's quirk dictated their destiny. Ideals that were quickly thrown out the window when she realized that it didn't matter if they had a strong quirk. If they used whatever they were given to help someone, then they were automatically a hero in her eyes.
Right. She muttered, not wanting to agree with her mother as she stared out the window. Do you think he's out there somewhere? Katsumi suddenly asked, breaking the silence she made. Her mother didn't know how to answer her. Truth be told, she didn't know. I don't know, part of he hopes so, but another doesn't. She truthfully answered, confusing her daughter as she turned her head back around to look at her mother, the question in her eyes. What are you talking about? She asked. Mitsuki kept her gaze on the road before them, turning down a new road that inched them closer to their destination. If Izu is still out there somewhere, I don't want to imagine what he's seen. Cat, I want you to listen, really listen to me. Her mother began, her voice lacking isn't usual heat as she spoke. Even if you manage to one day find him, the chances of him being the same boy you knew are next to impossible. People change, and from what you told me and your father, he was taken by a villain. Mitsuki answered, letting her daughter listen to her words.
Katsumi didn't answer. The image she always had for Izuku was of a boy who didn't let the world drag him down. A boy who always got back up, a boy who always gave it his all to be a hero. He'll never be a villain. She answered, her voice not showing any hint of doubt. He'd rather die than let anyone twist him into something he isn't. She finished, looking out the window once more as the two came to a stop.
That's not what I was implying. Mitsuki answered, looking at her daughter one last time as she offered her a smile.
Good luck, show em all how awesome you are, she said, offering her daughter a fist bump.
Scoffing Katsumi reciprocated the gesture, opening the door as she slung her backpack over her shoulders, glancing behind her as she offered a wave, before entering the gates of UA. Mitsuki didn't start the car for another few minutes, seeing as several other students began to walk into the school, a few catching her eyes. One even made he do a double take. The sight of green hair made her want a second look at that student, a habit she picked up after searching nearby cities for hours with her family looking for her best friend's son. Unfortunately, that particular student had already made it through the gates and out of her view. Sighing, she pulled down the car dashboard, seeing the picture that she had attached by a paper file.
It showed a teenager with her arms wrapped around a green-haired woman with her hair pulled back into a ponytail. They were both wearing cheerleader outfits. That's actually how the two met. Mitsuki smiled to herself as she remembered the antics her and Inko used to do in high school. Sighing to herself, she started up her car, pulling away and getting back onto the main road to head to her job. Glancing in the rear view mirror, she saw UA starting to get smaller, before turning and losing sight of the building entirely.
Back with Katsumi, who was currently in the main yard area. She held in her hands a piece of paper that had the schedule for the day. On the top right corner it showed what class she would be a part of this year. 1B huh? She asked herself, glancing upwards as she noticed several other people looking at a very similar piece of paper. Smirking to herself, she walked through the doors of the building. Seeing a map to her right, she began to intently stare at the map, unaware to the person right behind her, until they let out a squeal of happiness.
Oh my gosh, it's you, exploding girl, a girl with brown hair and pink cheeks said, her fingers together as she smiled as bright as the sun. It reminded Katsumi of Izuku's smile. Turning around, Katsumi instantly recognized the girl as the same girl she helped get away from the zero-pointer during the entrance exam. Oh, yeah, don't remember catching your name during the exam, pink cheeks. Katsumi answered, crossing her arms as she looked over the girl. The girl in question's blush marks immediately darkened in color. Oh, sorry about that, I'm Ochako Uraraka, pink cheeks happily said, her smile not wavering as she looked at the person who saved her life weeks ago. Bakugo. Katsumi Bakugo, she replied, looking down at the shorter girl with a small smirk on her face before turning around and began to look at the map once more.
So, which class did you get? Uraraka asked like an excitable puppy. It was honestly adorable if Katsumi was being honest. Heroics course. Class 1B. What about you, pink cheeks? Katsumi asked, ignoring the girl's surprised look at her being called pink cheeks instead of her name, but she didn't say anything about it. Oh, I am in the heroics class too. Only I'm in 1A. I was really hoping you'd be in the same class as me. Uraraka added, looking down sheepishly as she nervously twiddled with her fingers.
Katsumi sighed. Damn it, she was gonna have to befriend the ball of pure fluff, wasn't she? Life's full of disappointments. Tell ya what, I'll walk with you to class since it's right next to mine. Katsumi said with a shrug of her shoulders, already beginning to walk towards class 1B. Oh okay, Uraraka called out, a skip in her step as she followed Katsumi before walking in stride with her. So, the entrance exam was pretty crazy, right? Uraraka asked, trying to make conversation.
Katsumi scoffed and chuckled at the same time. How that's possible no one but her knows. Which part? The part where a giant beeping robot was destroying the damn city. Or when another even bigger robot started to break into our area, only for a red giant to crush it like a beepin' tin can? Katsumi asked back, an amused smile on her lips as the two walked down the several hallways that made up the building of UA. Coming to a halt, she heard an explosion, before her eyes went wide as she pushed her new acquaintance to the ground as a pink blur flew through the air. Crashing into a nearby wall, a girl with pink dreadlocks slowly began to force herself out of the impact she made. Hatsume. Class hasn't even started yet. How did you even manage to blow something up? A short man in an excavator armor yelled in exasperation as he looked down at his student who was still trying to pull herself out of the wall. Sorry, Mr. Powerloader Sensei. The girl with goggles said, somehow flipping herself out of the hole and bowed slightly at her apparent teacher. I was trying to fix something that broke this morning. The girl said in excitement. The man just sighed in exhaustion, rubbing the temple of his head with his mechanical gloves. Taking this as their chance to leave, Katsumi and Ochako left without so much as a trace. Making it a few hallways before a small snicker left the mouth of the shorter girl, covering her mouth so she didn't start bursting into laughter. Katsumi had an amused smile on her face as the two continued to walk with each other, her teeth actually showing as she watched the shorter girl. I never did answer your question, did I? Uraraka suddenly asked, getting over her small fit of laughter as she thought about her question. I mean, I guess both. Thanks for saving me again, by the way, she suddenly said, remembering what she wanted to say in the first place when she saw the explosive blonde. Don't mention it, and you already said thanks back at the exam. Katsumi shrugged off the praise, she just did what she thought Izuku would have done. Uraraka smiled at her words. I haven't been able to ask, but who was the red guy? Was he some pro that UA recently hired? She asked, her big brown eyes sparkling with interest.
Katsumi shook her head. I was curious too. I knew about most heroes in this area, so I wanted to look it up. Turns out the robot was another beeping zero-pointer, only some weird shit happened and it glitched. Apparently none of UA faculty were able to stop the damn robot, so another examinee decided to try his luck. You saw the results, Katsumi answered, her hands in the pockets of her skirt, a fact she was externally grateful that the damn skirt at least had pockets.
Wait, that means one of our classmates is the red guy?
Exclamation mark quote. Uraraka asked excitedly, her eyes full of wonder. Okay, seriously, she was too pure. Yup, if I had to guess he was probably first place. Hamato something if I remember correctly. Katsumi answered with a shrug, remembering the name when she saw her results a few weeks ago. That makes sense, with a quirk like that, he probably absolutely destroyed every single robot in front of them. Uraraka said, emphasizing her point by punching the air in front of her.
Katsumi's thoughts wandered back to the entrance exam, more specifically the giant red man made up of pure energy. For some reason that she couldn't explain, it felt like she somehow knew them.
Perhaps the energy itself was just comforting, but it felt like it was more than that, like something was calling her to them. She didn't have time to think about whatever it was, because no sooner had they turned a corner did the two see their different classrooms. Looks like this is where we part ways, pink cheeks, good luck to you. Maybe I'll see you in orientation, Katsumi said as she began to walk to where her class was located.
Oh right. Bye Bakugo. Uraraka called out, waving to the blonde girl she hoped would see her as a friend one day.
Everyone I tolerate calls me Cat, Katsumi grumbled as she began to softly stomp over to her classroom. Uraraka smiled to herself as she took a deep breath, looking toward the large doors before gathering her courage and opened the door. What do you mean cats are better than dogs? Two students yelled at the exact same time. Immediately Uraraka knew today was gonna be a good day. Katsumi made the way to her own classroom. She looked at the large door that had the title 1B inscribed on it. Taking a small breath she opened the door, only to see a girl with orange hair karate chopping a blonde boy whose face looked extremely punchable for some reason. Katsumi didn't lay any attention to the two, instead opting to sit in the back. She made eye contact with a girl with sharp shark-like teeth and mossy green hair. She offered a toothy grin as Katsumi sat beside her. Yeah, today was going to be weird. His green eyes narrowed as he twisted his body mid-air, the wind ruffling his green curls as his stripes glowed a bright blue. Flipping 180 degrees, Izuku Midoriya managed to land on the sand that made up Takoba Municipal Beach Park. He grit his teeth as he summoned his twin katanas, twirling them in his hand as he got into a fighting stance. It would only be a matter of moments before that thing came after him again. He saw the bright green that made up its eyes, his instincts running overdrive as he lunged forward, jumping high into the air as he twisted, throwing his blade into the air. The sword spun in a vertical circle, its path of trajectory aimed right at the giant attacker, its direct target being one of the large green mechanical eyes. Falling into a roll, Izuku bounced back up, clenching his right hand as he began to feel his sword hilt back in his hand as his pupils involuntarily dilated. A flash of blue and Izuku was now in front of the things that attacked him earlier. He swung his hand forward and slashed at the being, hearing the sound of his sword successfully slicing through the thing's body. He grinned. Flicking his left wrist, he threw back his other sword, flying through the air backwards before sticking inside of the ground where he previously was. Swinging his weight to the right side, Izuku managed to dodge an attack aimed at his head from a massive fist. Side-flipping several times, he eventually managed to land on the ground. Using this moment, he began to analyze his assailant. The creature stood at about 15 feet, its body being mostly bulky with a few points slimmer for mobility. Another striking detail was that its skin was completely made of metal and gears. Scratch that, everything about him was metal, gears and wires. This was a robot, not that much unlike form the robots in the entrance exam, but it also had quite a few differences. For starters, this robot had multiple arms, one eye and a shell. The body of the robot didn't have any obvious points of weakness. That was until Izuku paid close attention to its knees and elbows, that is. Ducking beneath a stray swing aimed for his head, Izuku immediately saw the intricate designs that surrounded the knees. Some type of rubber-like material that was both durable and strong enough to support the robot's movements, but there weren't many things on Earth that were resistant to the katanas that he currently held. With a smile he clenched his left hand, blipping back to where his sword that was sticking out from the ground currently was. His grin grew as he stood up, his swords pointed downwards as the giant robot began to make its way towards Izuku. Its 6 arms swinging dangerously, slamming against many piles of trash as it made its path towards the boy. In a swift and effortless motion Izuku lunged forward, meeting the robot head-on as he jumped up over 8 feet, blue electricity sparking between his fingers, running up the katana's metal, its engraved marking glowing bright blue as Izuku vanished out of thin air.
The robot's cold robotic gaze looked over where the boy once was, its head whipping around as it looked for its target.
Its 6 arms immediately got into a defensive stance, its green eyes looking over the area as it scanned relentlessly until it found the boy. In a flash, a blue portal opened up right before the robot, Izuku reappearing with a smile as he slashed his sword right across the robot's optic. "Peek-a-boo," Izuku yelled, disappearing once again, only to reappear behind one of the robot's massive arms. His blue eyes narrowed at its target, the one structural weak point he could see. Slashing his sword down he cut through the rubber that covered the elbow joint, effectively amputating the arm off completely. Reacting based on its programming, the robot reeled away, its 5 other arms swinging wildly at Izuku. Back flipping away from the robot's eyes, Izuku's eyes narrowed in on his next target. Landing in a handstand he pushed off with all his strength and launched himself up into the air, flipping his body to the side once again throwing his sword at the robot's knee. His eyes never left the blade that was flying through the air, spinning vertically, before it slowly began to become vertical as it inched itself closer to the robot's kneecap. Landing with a thud, Izuku managed to steady himself as he landed in a crouched position, both knees on the ground and one palm, his other hand behind him as he held onto his other katana. The airborne sword was still flying through the air, until it finally reached its target and sliced through the robot's knee with no effort at all. Flexing his hand Izuku called out and pulled to his sword, feeling it back in his hand as it flashed from its current path to his hand. The robot creaked, its one leg not being enough to hold up the massive weight of the robot. The robot's body fell forward as it face-planted into the soft sand of the beach, its arms twitching as the robot sparked in several spots. Standing up Izuku hesitantly made his way towards the downed robot. His sword still aimed at the robot, Izuku hesitantly kicked the robot with his foot, getting no reaction he kicked it a second time, this time hard enough to lightly dent the metal. Just like before the robot didn't move, allowing Izuku a moment to relax. Sheathing his swords onto his back, creating an X formation between the swords Izuku crouched down, and began to look for any markings to indicate where this robot came from. Soon enough Izuku managed to find a small engraving with the name of company, it just wasn't one he recognized. The name that Izuku managed to make out was Hatsume Industrial, the name didn't ring any bells in the boy's head, and a quick search only gave him a local car repair store. Sighing Izuku put away his phone and began to try and take off the robot's chest piece, his muscle bulged as he grabbed a hold of a sheet of metal that was welded together. His eyes glowed red as his swords disappeared, being replaced by the equally deadly sei that had red hilts. Smashing his fists together a red astral form began to surround the boy's arms, stooping right at his shoulders. Placing his hands on the metal sheet, his fingers began to indent the metal before puncturing the material altogether. Gripping tightly Izuku began to pull up, slowly beginning to rip off the piece of metal, before tossing aside the discarded piece of metal. The red around his arms vanished entirely as the boy crouched down, looking inside the machine's core only to see a very complicated mechanism connected to some type of power source. The boy whistled at the sight. Man, Donnie would have a field day with this. Izuku mused, his finger grazing one of many wires that made up the machine. The hair on the back of his neck straightened as he felt someone nearby. Man, where did my baby go? A girl the same age of Izuku said, her face full of black marks, no doubt some type of oil, as she stared at a small handheld device. Baby 7111 had found that strange energy source that was around the area, retrieving protocol activated before the signal cut, the girl said aloud, before stopping in her tracks as she saw the remains of her giant robot. My baby, the girl screamed, dropping the device as she ran up to her machine, crouching as she began to inspect the damage. "Shish, it's okay baby, Mama's here," the girl cooed as she began to pet the giant robotic arms of the mechanical beast. "Who did such a thing to you?" the girl asked, unshed tears in her eyes as she suddenly pulled out a screwdriver and welder from who knows where. Right when she turned on the welder, she felt something cool press against her neck. It felt like metal, which was what it was. Her eyes glanced down only to see a long blade connected to a blue hilt, which was being held by a boy with dark green hair, freckles and shining blue eyes. The girl couldn't speak from the shock, her eyes flicking between the boy and blade, unsure what she should do next. She dropped her tools and raised her hands high into the air. The boy narrowed his eyes at her, the pressure behind the katana loosening slightly on the girl's neck. "Who are you?" Izuku asked. His voice didn't give much room for leeway. He wanted answers, and he would get them. Hatsume. Mei Hatsume," the girl said, a slight amount of fear in her voice as the boy stepped forward. "Hatsume, as in Hatsume Industrial?" the green one asked, his hold on his katana giving her just enough room for her to nod. "In that case, care to explain why I was attacked by that?" Izuku asked, using his other sword to gesture at the fallen machine. The girl gave him a puzzled look. I don't know." The girl answered honestly, her intelligent mind running a mile a minute as she began to connect the dots between the boy and robot. "Not good enough. Who sent you?" the boy commanded, the grip on his blade tightening as he pressed the blade closer to her throat. "And no one. I swear, I'm just trying to find the energy source," Hatsume said. For the first time in her life she felt real, genuine fear. After several thousands of explosions, not much could rack her nerves, and right now he was doing just that to her. "Energy source? What energy source?" Izuku followed up with, not quite believing the girl's story entirely. Izuku took in her appearance fully now. She had long pink hair styled in dreadlocks, goggles and brown overalls. By all accounts she looked harmless. But Izuku knew from experience that looks can be deceiving. "The energy source. Me and baby 7111 were heading to Ua and suddenly we saw this immense power spike around this area. I figured it was some type of battery and well, I guess you got to it first huh? So tell me, what was it?" the girl asked, her demeanor doing a 180 as she was suddenly super excited. Blue eyes narrowed as he gazed into her soul, seeing no deception in her unique target-like eyes. He relented and pulled back his swords. Sheathing them once more, Izuku crossed his arms and glanced at the robot and girl duo once more before answering. "Look, there's no battery, so how about we forget this whole interaction happened deal?" Izuku asked, taking a step away from the girl as he glanced at the time. "Wait, are you sure there's no battery? My scanner is saying it's right around where you're." "Wait," the girl said before her voice became super quiet, glancing at the scanner and hero hopeful at a rapid rate. Her face paled as she stood up straight. "Damn it, not again," the girl groaned, looking at the scanner, only to see that the boy himself was the energy source. This got Izuku attention as he pointed at the scanner. "Care to explain what's got you in such a funk?" he asked. "Well, besides me threatening you with a sword that is." Izuku joked, trying to lighten the mood. "You're the energy source. Darn it, I thought I worked out those kinks since the last kid." She grumbled, making Izuku's sweat drop. "Wait, this happened to someone else." "I'm the battery huh?" Izuku asked, walking up to the girl as he glanced at the scanner. It showed him with 5 different colors swirling around each other that made up his body. The colors were blue, red, orange, purple and green. "Makes sense. My quirk lets me create and use energy to an extent," Izuku said, feeling slightly bad for the girl as he looked at the robot he destroyed not even 10 minutes ago. "Anyway, I can help fix 711, you know what, I'm just gonna call him Sheldon," Izuku asked looking at the girl. "Sheldon?" the girl asked, "better than random numbers." The boy shrugged as he crossed his arms waiting for an answer to his question. "And not unless you know how to rewire circuits and weld." "Wait, do you?" Hatsume asked, glancing at him and her baby. Izuku smirked. "My brother's pretty handy with tech, he taught me a few things," Izuku replied as he was suddenly spinning a screwdriver in his finger. "Wait, how did he get that?" Hatsume smiled as she herself pulled out a screwdriver and full toolbox from behind her. With a manic smile she began to mess with the wires that made up the central until of her robot, Izuku loosening the main connector points before the whole battery until was completely disconnected. This is the main part one wanted. But I think I can salvage most of it since you didn't do much damage. But I don't think I'll be able to recover a lot of the lower parts of 7111. Hatsume said as she held the battery core like it was a baby, a very explosive baby. Izuku hummed. So Sheldon's gonna be confined to a wheelchair then? The green one joked, before suddenly sticking his entire hand into the chest of the robot, his face grimacing as he stuck out his tongue. Hold up, I've almost got it, Izuku said, stopping his companion from jumping on the boy and pull him out. Pulling out his arm, it had oil and other gunk on it, but in his palms was a microchip that Hatsume had somehow forgot about. The memory chip, the girl asked, surprised that her new friend had somehow known where she put it. The boy nodded, didn't know if he had any useful information on it, but it couldn't hurt to go ahead and grab it for you.
Izuku mused, handing the girl her memory chip as he wiped off his messy arm with a rag he got from nowhere.
Sheldon's gonna need a lot of work, but I think you'll be able to fix him somewhat, Izuku said, knocking his fingers against the arm of the robot. 7111, Hatsume said as she offered a small smile. And thanks, now I just have to get him to UA. Izuku smiled, before pulling out one of his swords, call this apologies for destroying Sheldon. Izuku said with a smirk as he slashed through the air. A large circular blue portal formed underneath the metal giant, only to fall and disappear as the portal flashed out of existence. Sheldon's at UA's gate. Same as you, the green-haired boy offered with a smile, creating another portal in front of the girl. Thanks, Greenie, the girl called out as she jumped through the newly formed portal, leaving behind a small piece of hard paper. Picking it up, Izuku couldn't stop the smile from forming on his face. A business card, huh? He asked aloud, pocketing the card before making his way to the entrance of the beach. It was going to take a lot of work, even more if he had to deal with rogue robots every day, but Izuku knew that this was something that he was going to do. A small smile was on his face as he walked through a portal. 1 second he was on the beach, next he was in his small living room. His eyes glancing once again on the pictures that he had on the walls, before stopping on one with him and his once best friend hugging each other with a smile on their faces. Wonder if I'll see you today, Kachan. Izuku mused as he walked into his bedroom, grabbing the school uniform as he contemplated using his quirk to travel to the school instantly. Deciding to instead to ride to the school, Izuku grabbed his bag before looking into his home one more time, flipping off his light switch as he turned off the lights. Izuku had a slight spring in his step as he began to walk down the sidewalk. His headphones around his neck as he dropped his skateboard on the ground, his feet being planted on the board before turning his headphones on. Izuku smiled as he pushed off the ground, beginning to gain more and more speed as he felt the grooves underneath his wheels. Crouching down low, Izuku shifted his body weight to the right, making a sharp corner without loosening any speed. Standing tall, he enjoyed the sensation of the cool morning breeze against his skin. 1. Live by the code of the martial arts. Izuku smiled as he came to a screeching halt, standing tall as he looked and saw a construction crew repairing the street from a recent attack. His green eyes looked over the scene before pushing his feet against the ground once more, turning down a new street that led him to a connecting street that would get him to the same destination. 2. Never fight unless someone else starts. Izuku's head hopped up and down slightly at the sound of drums coming from his headphones, crouching down low as he began to pick up more and more speed. He began to become that akin to a blur, the speed he was moving at impressive to any onlookers who might have spotted the boy.
3. Always stick together no matter what. In the corner of his eyes, he saw an incoming object he immediately recognized as a speeding car that ran a red light. Acting on instinct, Izuku kicked the back of his board, launching both himself and board high into the air, effectively jumping over the car, the board spinning vertically before finding its place under the boy's feet. Bracing himself for the impact, Izuku bent his knees outward as he felt the board beneath him take the brunt of the landing. Stretching out his hand, Izuku gripped onto a large metal pole that was also a stop sign. Flexing his arms, he used the sign to turn his body 90 degrees, going down a new street as he stood tall, finally seeing the building known as Ua. 4. If all else fails, then it's time to kick butt. Izuku didn't pedal his feet anymore, allowing his speed to become a moderate pace as he stuffed his hands in his pockets, looking around as he saw a few other people walking on Tei's sidewalks. A few were giving him curious looks before Izuku caught sight of some very familiar gravity-defying purple hair. Izuku began to come to a stop as he saw he had the purple boy's attention, a look of recognition flashing in the boy's purple eyes.
Teleporting boy. The boy mused aloud, coming to a halt as he saw Izuku wave at the boy, skidding to a stop as he kicked up the board to his hands, before attaching it to the back of his backpack. Ripping off his headphones, Shinso heard something about turtles before the audio cut off, Izuku turning on the music as he stuffed both his headphones and phone into his bag. Shinso right? Izuku asked, trying to see if he remembered correctly. The indigo teen known as Shinso Hitoshi smirked as he offered a small nod. Watching as the green boy came up to him with a small smile on his face. What are the odds we ran into each other? Last time I saw you, you were destroying those robots with your killer bat moves. Izuku said, swinging his arms at an invisible ball coming his way. Shinso gave an amused look, studying the boy for any information he could get, before finally deciding. Let me guess, you're not from round here, are ya? Shinso asked, looking at the boy curiously. How'd you guess? Was it my boyish good looks and charms? Izuku asked, offering a smile that showed his pearly whites, earning a small scoff from the other boy. Charms? Does forcing me to talk to you count as charms? Shinso retorted, an amused glint in his purple eyes as Izuku faked a gasp, an over-exaggerated hurt expression on his face. Le gasp. How could you think something like that, Shinso? I thought you were a mean friend. Izuku cried in fake anguish, wiping away a fake tear. All right, drama boy, Shinso said, rolling his eyes, but even he couldn't resist the small smile that created on his lips at the boy's antics. Izuku chuckled softly before stuffing his hands into his pockets. Was born nearby in Musatafu. Ever heard of that place? Izuku asked, getting a nod from his new soon-to-be friend. He continued. Then I moved to the Big Apple, New York itself, for over a decade, and now I'm here. What about you? You live close by? Izuku asked, changing the conversation to the perplexed. Yup, Shinso said, popping the P as he spoke.
Born and raised in the Saitama Prefecture. Hopefully soon that won't be the case.
Shinso said, copying Izuku as he stuffed his hands into his pockets, slumping his shoulders slightly at his words. Crappy childhood? Izuku asked, not caring to be delicate and just ripped the metaphorical band-aid off. The sleep-deprived boy offered a dry laugh, shaking his head amused. You ever been treated like a villain for just existing? Probably not, Shinso mused, his eyes kept forward as he let the conversation between the two die. The jovial attitude between the two died in an instant, Izuku's small smile disappearing as his mind inadvertently reminded him of times from a decade ago. Can't say I have, Izuku lied, but that doesn't mean I don't know how people like that are treated. Let me guess, villainous Quirk? Izuku asked, deciding to not let the conversation die as he prodded into the boy's personal life. Yup, Shinso dryly admitted, probably as villainous as they come. Yet I still want to be a hero. Does that make me crazy? Shinso asked with a rough voice. Izuku nodded to his words. Probably. But then again, most of us hero students are crazy. Izuku joked, his smug smile making its way back on his face as he saw the purple boy give him the side eye. At the very least you are, Shinso said to himself, earning a laugh from the green boy with blue eyes. So, I assume you got in. What class did you get? Shinso asked, reluctantly admitting he for some reason enjoyed the interaction with this living broccoli. Heroics Class 1A. What about you? Izuku asked, grabbing a piece of paper from his backpack that showed his schedule for the day. Same. Guess we're classmates then. Oh, and thanks, Shinso muttered under his breath, glancing at the blue-eyed boy that was of a similar height to him, only an inch or so shorter. Oh. Don't mention it, amigo, Izuku said, waving his right hand to symbolize that it really didn't matter.
Amigo. What are you suddenly Spanish now? Shinso asked, an amused smirk on his face. Oh, I'm always Spanish, and French, English, I even know a little Russian. Izuku said with a confident smile. So yeah, guess I'm Spanish hermano. The green one said, lightly punching Shinso in the shoulder, feeling nothing but bone. Izuku slightly cringed. Okay, after school I'm taking you to the gym. We're gonna build up some muscle on those bony arms of yours. Izuku suddenly said, much to the confusion of the boy. And why should I? Shinso immediately shot back, already wondering why this boy was being so pushy after knowing him for less than 10 minutes. Because you're literally skin and bones. Let me guess, your quirk can render anyone unconscious at a thought? Izuku asked, getting surprisingly close to his quirk. Not quite, but close enough. Why does that matter? Shinso asked, slightly intrigued now. Because, you probably think that your quirk makes all playing fields tip in your favor, right? Wrong. What if someone gets past your quirk, what would you do then? Izuku asked, expecting an answer to his question. Shinso blinked, and then he blinked again. Punch him obviously, Shinso said, his eyebrow raised as he began to question the boy's intelligence. Izuku hummed, and if he's stronger than you, can you confidently say you can knock someone out with your fist if you need to? Izuku asked, making Shinso realize what he was getting at. Sheepishly Shinso shook his head, rubbing his arm slightly. Guess I need some physical training, huh? Shinso darkly asked with a chuckle. Izuku grinned. Don't worry, with my workout regimen, we'll get you in tip-top shape in a few agonizing and painful months. Izuku offered with an innocent smile that promised only pain. Do I have the choice to back out? Shinso dryly asked, making Izuku shake his head in response. Leaning to his side, Izuku slung his arm around Shinso's neck. Nope. You're stuck with me now, hermano. Don't worry, in a few hours we're gonna be like brothers. Izuku said, walking his Shinso in two. I want to be disowned. The purple one said, making Izuku laugh in response. Sorry, brother. But now you're stuck with me, Izuku said with a smile, unarming his new friend as he saw the gates that made up Ua. You said you got 1A right? Getting an affirmative nod, Izuku continued onward. Cool. That just means I'll have an easier time getting you to accept me as your new friend, Izuku said with a cheesy smile, much to the annoyance of Shinso. How did you do that? You're not supposed to just walk up to someone and demand to be friends. Shinso muttered, secretly writing down what he did for later uses. Yet, I just did, Izuku said with a shit-eating grin, dodging the light jab from Shinso as he smiled. Come on, you don't want to be late, do you? Izuku asked, picking up the pace to a light jog. Your training begins now, Izuku called out, successfully getting the purple boy to run after him. What? Why now? Shinso called out, now fully accepting that this was his life now. A ninja always expects the unexpected. So start expecting the expected. And when people are running late, they run. Izuku called back, picking up the speed slowly to let Shinso just barely keep pace with him. You're insane. We're not even late, Shinso called out, already breathing heavy. If we're not 5 minutes early, we're late. Now mush, Shinso, mush. Pump those straw legs with everything you've got, Izuku said with a laugh, earning another groan from the boy behind him. A small genuine smile etched onto the boy's face, his green hair swishing in the wind slightly as he banged to dramatically swing his arms, making him run in a cartoonish fashion. I hate you, Shinso dryly said, but was still running, albeit in a very sloppy fashion. Is this considered kidnapping? I mean, I didn't give my consent to this torture? Shinso called out, his breathing already heavy as he attempted to keep up with his new friend. You think this is torture? Izuku asked, a wide smile on his face as his eyes twinkled. Just wait till you see what I've got planned for later. Hope you're not attached to feeling your arms, Izuku called out, picking up the pace as his form slowly began to improve as his strides became larger. Attached to feeling my arms? Do I even want to know what that means? Shinso called out, stopping at a corner with his hands on his knees. Meanwhile, Izuku was jogging in place. His smirk grew as he answered his friend, probably not. But are you going to quit because you don't like a little pizzazz in your life? Izuku jokingly asked, earning an audible groan from Shinso in return. Soon enough the pair was off again, now on the final stretch as Ua was getting closer and closer to the two. Alright, you see that mailbox at the front gate? That's our finish line, Izuku said, watching as Shinso's strides began to have a little extra pep in them. Come on Shinso, you got this, Izuku called out, earning several grunts as the boy pushed his body to its limits, being able to match Izuku's pace as the two began to cross the finish line. Izuku slowly came to a walking pace. Meanwhile Shinso decided to promptly collapse to the ground, his hands sprawled out as his chest rose up and down. I hate huff you, Shinso said between breaths, giving the green boy was one could care a death glare. Izuku just smiled brightly at the boy's attitude. Several people gave the two weird glances, not that it mattered much to the two. Alright, time to get up Shinso, Izuku said, reaching his hand down to the boy he just took under his wing. No beep you, Shinso deadpanned, refusing to stand even a second after that workout. Izuku's sweat dropped. You do realize that wasn't even a mile, right? Izuku asked, an amused smile on his face, hearing the boy groan in frustration as he picked his head up. Beep you, Shinso dryly said, reluctantly taking the outstretched hand and hoisted himself up. Cheer up Shinso. This just means you have a lot of room to improve, Izuku said, poking Shinso in the arm as the two entered the gates of Ua. Yeah whatever, wait, why did I just do all of that, when I didn't even get your name? Shinso asked himself, suddenly realizing that he had no idea what his new friend's name was. Izuku shrugged his shoulders in response, name's Hamato. Izuku mentally cringed, it would always be weird saying that name no matter how hard he tried. Yanaki Hamato, Izuku clarified, getting a nod from the purple boy as the two began to walk through the main yard for Ua. Hamato huh? Shinso mused, eyes widening slightly in recognition at the name. Damn, so you got the highest entrance score huh? Shinso asked, remembering where he saw that name before, on his acceptance letter from a few weeks back. Yup, Izuku said, popping the P as he spoke. Turns out there was such a thing as hero points, who knew? Izuku mused, shrugging his shoulders before he saw a familiar electric blonde making his way through the gates with another purple-haired person. Yo, Kaminari, Izuku called out, getting the attention of the electric boy as he smiled brightly. Kaminari's eyes widened when he first saw Izuku, waving as the girl beside him rolled her eyes before extending her long ears and told him something that Izuku couldn't quite make out. Yo, Hamato. How's it going man? Kaminari asked, walking up to the green and purple duo with a smile on his face, plus a hint of redness on his cheeks from whatever that girl said. Kaminari, meet Shinso, my new apprentice, Izuku said, a beaming smile on his face as he felt a light slap on his back. Am not your apprentice, Shinso muttered, before looking at Kaminari with a curious look. That's right I'm sorry, meet my new brother, Izuku followed up, a cheesy grin on his face as he heard his new brother face palm as Kaminari resisted the urge to burst out laughing. Help me, Shinso said, a tired expression on his face as he begged Kaminari for help. I've known for less than 15 minutes, and somehow he's both simultaneously kidnapped me and made me his friend. Shinso deadpanned. And don't forget brother Hermano, Izuku said, wrapping his arms around the purple boy's shoulders, his smile reaching his ears as Kaminari desperately tried to keep himself from laughing. You're not even Spanish. Izuku gasped. How dare you, for your information, one of my closest friend is a living skeleton. Izuku said, confusing both Shinso and Kaminari to an extent they didn't think was possible. That's relevant how? Shinso asked, giving up on trying to shrug Basi's arm off his shoulders. Because he was Spanish. I'm allowed to speak Spanish by association. The green one responded in an overly cheery voice. Ah, Senior Husio, you will be missed, Izuku said, wiping away a fake tear from his eyes. I can't even tell if you're serious or not, Shinso said, looking at the boy with a far more curious gaze than he meant. Oh no, I'm dead serious. One of my closest friends was a living skeleton, he was a riot on Cinco de Mayo. Izuku responded, pulling his arm off Shinso's shoulders as he looked at the door to the school. Well, you guys coming? Izuku asked, already beginning to walk away from the other two. Both Shinso and Kaminari watched as their new friend, brother walked off, Purple's eyes zeroed in on something that the indigo teen had no idea how he misses the first time. Wait, are those katanas strapped to his backpack? Shinso suddenly asked, finally noticing the ancient weaponry on the boy's back. Huh? Oh yeah, they allow him to teleport. At least that's what he told me. Kaminari shrugged as he began to catch up to the boy. So the most extroverted person I've ever met has teleportation powers. Sure, why not? Shinso sighed. Why was this his life? The three soon found themselves inside the main halls that made up UA. Leading the charge through the halls was none other than Midoriya, a small map in his hands as he began to navigate the way through the concrete jungle. I think we've passed that water fountain 3 times by now. Shinso dryly commented, pointing at a water fountain that was coming up. What? There's no way. Let me see the map. Kaminari said, grabbing the map from their green partner's hands. What kind of language is this? The electric blonde said, looking dumbly at the piece of paper. It's called mapping. Izuku helpfully said, taking the map back as he glanced between the paper and before-mentioned water fountain. Wait, was I holding this upside down? The green-haired boy asked himself, flipping the map around and looked at it with an analytical gaze. Okay. Our destination is just around the corner. Izuku called out, going into a confident walk. That's what you said 10 minutes ago. The purple one deadpanned, starting to grow tired of the boy's antics. Izuku pointed his finger to Shinso. I did say that, but that was also before I realized I was holding it upside down. Ah. We're here. The verdant teen said, coming to a sudden stop as he stood in front of a massive door. A collective thought ran through teens' minds, but only one voiced his thoughts. Wait, why is the door so big? Izuku asked, speaking his mind as Kaminari immediately replied. That's what she said. Silence filled the air as the two boys looked at the human lightning rod with looks that told a clear story. What it was, nobody would ever know. Welp. Let's get this show on the road, Izuku said as he opened the door, only to see that the class was mostly full already. His green eyes began to look at all his new classmates. Instantly he recognized the boy with a crow's head sitting in around the middle of the room, talking to someone with straight black hair and weird elbows. He recognized another pink-skinned girl he assumed he in his mock city, and the girl with weird ears from earlier was talking to a guy with a fluffy blonde tail. Oh hey Jiro. I finally made it, Kaminari said like an excited puppy, heading over to the girl that smiled softly at the blonde's declaration. Izuku looked and saw that several people were looking at him with curious looks. One was from a girl with a spiky black ponytail who was sitting in the far right corner. Next to her sat a boy with dual-toned hair looking at him like he was a piece of meat. Oh my gosh. Kiri. This was the guy the first was talking about. The one with the 6 swords. The pink-skinned girl shouted excitedly, gaining the attention of both Izuku and a boy with red hair and shark-like teeth. A very sparkly boy also looked interested in what the pink girl said, turning around to look at the boy who had suddenly become the center of attention to a lot of people. Summoning his best smile, Izuku raised his hand. Hey, name's Yanaki Hamato. I assume you were in my mock city? Izuku asked, trying to understand the situation better. The before-mentioned girl nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, I was actually one of the people you got out of the way when the whole zero-pointer robot showed up. The girl said, offering small smile. Izuku snapped his fingers, remembering where he saw the girl. Oh yeah, I remember you now. Izuku confirmed, his blue eyes looking at the red-haired boy with a slight hint of uncertainty. He didn't like the look in the boy's eyes. Dude, she told me what you did. That was so manly. The red boy said, a genuine smile on his lips that could make the most stressed-out people relax upon seeing it. Name's Kirishima Ajiro. And that's my girlfriend Ishido Mina. The spiky red head, Kirishima said as he offered his hand to Izuku. The greenette smiled as he took the offered hand. Hamato Yanaki. And this grump is Shinso Hitoshi. Say hi Shinso. Izuku said, wrapping his arms around the boy's neck once more. First you kidnap me, forcefully befriend me, decided to torture me, and now you expect me to talk to random people? You've crossed a line. Shinso deadpanned, crossing his arms as he dared the boy to challenge him. Izuku smirked. First of all, it's not a kidnapping if I didn't physically stop you from leaving. Second, don't say you're not thrilled being my friend. And third, if you thought that was torture, well, let's just say you won't be able to walk for a while. Shinso grumbled something as he managed to shake off the boy's arm. Okay, fine. I'll bring a dog, I'm sure that'll cheer you up, Izuku offered, a stupid grin on his face as he secretly enjoyed the reactions that his new classmates were having at the exchange. I prefer cats, Shinso said, crossing his arms as he stared at the green broccoli boy. What? Who in their right mind prefers cats to dogs? It's unorthodox, Izuku said, disbelief in his voice. Ashido, Kirishima. Back me up on this, Izuku pleaded, looking at the two newcomers with puppy dog eyes. Stifling a laugh, Mina just dumbly nodded, while Kirishima just smiled. I don't really care to be honest, Kirishima said, a nervous smile as he rubbed the back of his neck. Dogs are totally better, Hamato, Mina agreed. Sighing, Izuku smiled as he pointed at the alien girl. At least one person has some sense. Kaminari. Dogs or cats? Izuku asked the blonde. The Sparky boy replied with a shrug. Cats. Izuku clung to his heart. What do you mean cats are better than dogs? Both him and Mina yelled. Izuku immediately gained much more respect for the walking strawberry. I mean, my auntie has a cat, and he's pretty chill, most of the time anyways. Kaminari said, a shiver running up his spine as he remembered the incident between him, his aunt and Outlet. They're literal gremlins, Izuku called out, his hands up in the air with an exasperated groan, before he turned around when he suddenly felt like someone else was behind him. Turning around, he immediately saw the same girl he became a human pretzel with on the day of the entrance exams. Her brown eyes lit up in recognition, before her permanent blush marks darkened. Offering his best smile, Izuku waved to the newcomer. Perfect timing. Can you please explain to these two chuckleheads why dogs are better than cats? The green boy asked, pointing to the purple and electric boy. Before the girl could respond, a tall boy with blue hair stood over Izuku by a good 3 or 4 inches, marched his way over to the group, cutting his way into the conversation. Excuse me. The boy, who had his hair slicked back, his uniform in pristine condition, his glasses pulled up as he glared at the green-haired student. But is that a skateboard on your backpack? The boy sternly asked, pointing to the skateboard strapped to Izuku's backpack. Izuku glanced between the boy and board. Nope. I just thought it'll be a good idea to grab this random piece of wood I found, strap some wheels on it and duct tape it to my backpack. Izuku deadpanned, earning a few laughs from his class. His response irked the tall boy, his blue eyes narrowing as he karate chopped the air with speeds that could put a seasoned karate master to shame. I must request that you get rid of that board. It is against the rules for students to ride the following in the halls: skateboards, rollerblades, skates, skoo. Am I riding it right now? Izuku asked, interrupting the stiff boy. Crossing his arms as he waited for the tall teen to respond, instead it appeared as if the boy had just noticed the sword strapped to his backpack as well. And those, it is illegal to have such weapons on. Izuku shut up the tall boy by placing a hand on one of the blue hilts that his swords had. Stop jumping to conclusions. They're part of my quirk, Izuku said, his answer both blunt and brief as he turned away from the stern boy. Now, where were we? Oh, that's right, you two were about to admit stat dogs are better than cats, Izuku said, ignoring the sputters coming from the blue-haired, glasses-wearing boy. Yeah, that's right, we were. Hey, wait a second, Kaminari yelled, nearly falling for the trick the green bean set in motion. So close, Izuku muttered, still smiling until he noticed something extremely odd in the door entrance. If you're here to discuss pets, then you don't deserve to be in this class, an unknown voice said. Laying in the middle of the door was this yellow slug-looking thing with a human's head. Now, allow me to paint a picture for you. You're a super-powered teenager that has the power to level cities. You're seen more weird shit in your life than most can ever imagine. Yet, somehow this single experience topped everything else Izuku had ever seen. Now Izuku wasn't the only one to notice it. No, both Shinso and Kaminari noticed the weird creature after not getting a response from the freckled teen. The hell, Izuku managed to say, gaining a few people's attention as they now looked at the sleeping caterpillar with a human's head. Suddenly tired black eyes shot open as they looked at the 20 students that were now in the room.
To everyone's surprise, the yellow slug stood up, a zipping noise being heard as a gruff-looking homeless man stepped out of the yellow carcass. Oh, it was just a sleeping bag. Izuku eyed the man wearily, his fingers instinctively twitching at the presence of the man. The homeless man had some type of jelly pouch in his hand, chugging down the food. The man decided to finally speak.
The man had yellow goggles strapped around his neck, the beginning of a 5 o'clock shadow and an interesting-looking scarf around his neck. Finally, the man decided to speak. My name is Shota Aizawa, and I'll be your homeroom teacher for the next 3 years. Shota Aizawa prided himself on being a man who based his life on 2 principles. He prided himself in know what was rational and irrational, but lately the line between rational and irrational was being more and more complicated. His long black hair was pulled back from his face, the mug of coffee off to the side for easy access. In front of him was his personal computer that held all the information on his future students. The file that he pulled up wasn't the first time. Each time he read the boy's file, the more he realized things just didn't line up. Yanaki Hamato, Quirk. Weapon summary, able to create various weapons.
Aizawa smirked slightly at the vague description of his quirk. If he hadn't seen firsthand what he could do, the man would have no idea about the boy's ability to teleport. The man couldn't fault the boy for not putting everything in his quirk registry. In fact, he was actually impressed. Most people wouldn't think about not revealing everything your quirk could do on the registry. No, that wasn't the part that caught Aizawa for a loop.
One glance at the boy and already Shota knew what type of personality the kid would have. Another one of those cocky, arrogant brats that believed themselves to be the top dog. Only, the boy didn't exactly fit the puzzle piece the man created for the boy. For starters, he wasn't above helping other applicants. That much was obvious from the zero-pointer stunt. He even went so far as to encourage another student. The underground hero hummed to himself as he took another large gulp of his liquid gold, enjoying the burnt taste for a moment as he played the entrance exam recording once more. The video first showed the boy at the front gates, pulling out his swords and getting into a stance that could put world-famous fighters to shame. Then, in one fluid motion, the boy drew his swords, before slicing through the air and disappearing into the city. The reaction time of the boy was definitely something to admire. Not many people could react this fast, not to mention the throw of his sword. When Aizawa first saw the boy throw his sword, he had several thoughts run through his mind, none of them being anywhere near the mark. His first thought was him being reckless, thinking that the boy thought this was just going to be a game. His second thought was that he was an idiot. Those thoughts were quickly squashed. The instant Shota saw the boy disappear in another flash of blue, only to reappear where the flying sword was. To saw he was surprised would be accurate. Not many things surprised the underground hero, but this boy did. His swords were able to cut through the metal with ease. Which either meant his swords were stronger or sharper than any other swords, or the boy's strength and technique was impeccable. Most likely a combination of both, as the man had to guess. For the next several seconds the boy would flash in and out of robots' paths, destroying them before moving on. His movements were smooth and looked like he could do them with very little to no concentration, something that definitely took the boy countless hours of practice and trying. Which was why the underground pro hero, Eraserhead, was having such a hard time with the boy. Everything about the boy on first glance portrayed him as someone who saw everything as a joke, who saw everything as if it didn't matter. The boy was an absolute conundrum, almost like as if the boy wanted to be viewed as a pompous asshole. That was the only conclusion the man could think of, but such an idea was simply irrational. The hero didn't know, just like he knew hardly anything on the boy besides his residence and local dojo he trained at. The boy's address was updated a few days ago, after he got an apartment that wasn't too far away from the campus, but besides that no new information was added on the boy. He had no known living family members. Instead he was kind of Soto, adopted by the rat man who owned the Four Turtles dojos, even taking up his last name. The boy's real last name was unknown, just like the full extent to his quirk. His quirk, Weapon Summon, said that he could create weapons reminiscent from the 1800s, more specifically the weapons that were mostly associated to those of ninjas. The file said that he was able to create 4 different types of weapons, and currently the man had only seen half of the boy's capabilities, his swords and say. Part of the man was curious about what else his problem child would be able to do. Another was dreading trying to teach a student with supposedly 4 different quirks. In the middle of his thoughts, He felt a pair of arms wrap around his neck as he felt something soft press against his cheek.
Her lips were soft as she beeped her husband's cheek, her seafoam green eyes happy and bright as she pulled her husband close. "Sho, what are you still doing up?" Emi Fukukado, aka the pro hero, Mrs. Joke asked, her clothes consisting only of a large baggy white t-shirt that was shower her shoulder, and a pair of short shorts. She had a sleepy smile as her husband leaned in slightly to the embrace, his hand wrapping around her arm. "I'm just looking at the files for my new class of problem children," Aizawa said, rubbing a soothing circle on his wife's hand. Her head turned around to look at his computer screen, her eyes narrowing as she read the basic information on the boy. "Hamato?" she asked, the name ringing a bell in her head for whatever reason. Her husband nodded softly. "Kid's a living conundrum. First time in a very, very long time I haven't been able to accurately profile a person on first glance."
This got her attention, suddenly becoming much more awake as her hand rested on his shoulder, releasing him from her bear hug. "Okay. You gonna elaborate on that, or am I gonna have to pry the information out of you?" she asked, her fingers now in his long black locks, playing with a few strands as she waited for him to answer. Aizawa sighed as he begrudgingly let his wife play with his hair, something he really didn't understand why she liked so much. "Take a seat," the man offered, gesturing to a nearby chair. Emi smirked, before climbing into her husband's lap, leaning into his chest. "This okay?" she teased with a smile. He knew full well he couldn't attempt to argue with her, so he just huffed and nodded, ignoring the small amount of pink on his cheeks. "It's fine," he muttered, placing a hand around her waist to hold her steady as he gave his wife a clear view of the file and video on his computer screen. "Wait, this was the kid who totaled that zero-pointer. Speaking of which, do you know why that even happened?" Emi suddenly asked, remembering something she meant to ask him earlier. Aizawa shook his head. Powerloader is still currently salvaging anything he can, hoping to understand why it got a surge of power and grew in height. His best guess so far is that it got some type of virus somehow, but his guess is about as good as yours at this point," the underground hero said with a shrug of his shoulders. Mrs. Joke nodded, making herself more comfortable as she began to read more into the student's file. "Oh, that's why I recognized the name Hamato. One of my students used to go to that dojo. Didn't know their master had another son,"
Emi suddenly said, reading the name of the dojo the boy trained at for years. This got the man's attention instantly. "He doesn't, at least not biologically. It says the boy has no known living relatives. My best guess is that he took up the Hamato name after they gave him shelter. But that just gives me more questions that I have no possibility of getting the answers to, not without speaking to the dojo's owner Hamato himself," Aizawa replied. Emi hummed as she finished reading the boy's file. "I can ask Tatami when she gets back from her work study if she knows anything about him. She lived in New York for a few years before moving back here. It's a long shot, but it might help," she offered, smiling as she began to read about the boy's quirk. "Weapon summon?" she asked, clearly confused at the very little on the boy's quirk registry. Aizawa hummed, nodding slightly. "Thanks, and his quirk allows him to create weapons like the name suggests." It took Nezu an hour before he finally found out the other aspects to his quirk. Apparently each weapon he summons give him a unique ability. Swords equals teleportation, Sei equal giant red being. Aizawa answer, raising his finger to each of his points. "And before you ask, no, neither I nor the rat have any ideas what other abilities he has. The file claims he has access to 4 different weapons," Aizawa finished. "So, you have a student that got the highest score in the school, and you don't even know what all his quirk does on the fundamental level?" Emi asked, looking at the paused screen, studying the position the boy was in, a sideways spin with one arm extended. "Is he throwing the sword?" she asked, clearly confused as to why her husband wasn't grumbling about irrational ideas. Aizawa nodded. "He doesn't just make portals with his swords, he can also teleport himself to where his swords are," Shota answered, pressing play and showing Emi the video of him blipping around the city. "He's good. Really good," Emi said, agreeing with her husband's thoughts on the boy's skill. "I mean, how long did it take you to learn that move?" she asked, pointing to the screen that showed Hamato side flipping before landing in a handstand and springing backwards in a flip. A few months, but that was also after I had been doing parkour for several years. Kid's got skills, but what really makes me question him is this. Aizawa said, showing a section of the video of him taking the whole exam like a joke, making witty one-liners as he effortlessly destroyed the robots. Mrs. Joke hummed as she watched. Kid's got an attitude that screams cocky, except it really isn't, is it?
She asked with a smile, knowing her husband well enough to know that he had already made a head profile on him. Instead of verbally responding, he fast-forwarded the video to when the zero-pointer forts appeared. His blue eyes shined with something that both of them knew very well, fear. Kid didn't hesitate when he saw the zero-pointer. Instead he ran head first despite the obvious fear in his eyes. While everyone else ran away, he stayed and made sure it couldn't hurt anyone else. This is only one of many examples of his actions counteracting my analysis on him. The only possible reason I can have for him to be like this is because he's faking it. He's faking the confidence he shows, making everything a joke as a coping mechanism. She finished, looking at him with a new light. You're right. He's masking something behind the jokes and cocky attitude. You see brief glances of it when he saves someone, a caring side seeping through. She continued, her own thoughts running a mile a minute. Exactly. But then that just leaves me with more questions. Emmy nodded to her husband's words, biting on her finger as she sighed in defeat. Well, there's not really anything else you can do.
Knowing you've got all your other students memorized, so how about you join me in bed? She asked, stretching her arms out, a sly smile on her lips as she leaned closer. Plus, I miss my grumpy teddy bear. She pouted, he long green hair framing her face perfectly as she pouted, her lips large and inviting. The man sighed in defeat. Let me turn everything off. The man relented, stretching his arms as his wife slipped off his laps, before turning to his computer once more.
All right, kid. Let's hope you don't disappoint, Aizawa said as he turned off the computer, heading back to his wife. The underground hero had decided to test his new student's situational awareness. The man wouldn't say he was impressed by his new students so far, but one student definitely piqued his interest the most. He knew the boy would be interesting. Hell, he labeled him as his new resident problem child, but he didn't expect the boy to both not only notice him nearly instantly, but also gave no signs of seeing him. The only reason Aizawa knew the kid saw him was the almost invisible wave that the boy somehow managed to do without anyone else seeing him. Problem Child and 5 others were in a discussion about something meaningless, even if cats were superior in every way possible. Deciding that the conversation had gone on for long enough, the pro hero decided to make his presence known. If you're here to discuss pets, then you don't deserve to be in this class. His voice was gruff as he slowly opened his tired black eyes, standing up freaking out his new class. Aizawa would never admit this to anyone, but he did enjoy seeing his students' reactions to his caterpillar state, as both Midnight and Mike called it. The hell? Problem Child asked, his voice full of confusion like this was the first time he saw him. Interesting. The man flinched slightly when his class erupted into chaos. He didn't get paid enough for this. Having enough, the man unzipped his sleeping bag, letting it fall to the ground as he stood tall. In his hand he held the only nutrition that he would be able to have until dinner. Slurping down his protein-rich flavor pouch, he began to make mental notes of his new students. There was only so much that could be learned from student files. Problem Child. He could worry about him later, it would help ease his upcoming headache hopefully. The 2 boys who were close by him, clearly friends of his to some degree. The tall engine boy, the man desperately wanted to groan at his friend's younger brother. He was still a stickler to the rules, perhaps more than would be necessary. He heard the tall boy, Ida Tenya's, conversation with Problem Child. Wait, are those swords attached to his backpack? That was unexpected, not because Problem Child had them but because that was usually something that would be immediately noticed by him. But that wasn't important right now. Right now he had to make a good first impression. My name is Shota Aizawa, and I'll be your homeroom teacher for the next 3 years. The man said in a monotone voice that made it clear that he wasn't happy to be here. Silence filled the class, the sound of a pen dropping as one student desperately tried to catch it before it hit the ground.
Wait, what? Nearly all the students yelled. Instinctively the hero fired up his quirk, his black eyes turning blood red as he looked over everyone, his long hair floating in the air as he effectively shut everyone up. It took all of you nearly 6 seconds for everyone to shut up and sit down. Do you know how many people can die in 6 seconds? The tired hero asked rhetorically, his students desperately climbing into the first open seat. At your time here, we will make sure you understand the difference a few seconds can make. Aizawa said, grabbing some school uniforms from his clothes, setting them on his desk as he addressed his class once again. Put these on, we'll be conducting a quirk appreciation test to gauge everyone's potential. Met me in Field Gamma in 10 minutes. Locker rooms are down the hall. The homeroom teacher said as he left his new students alone.
Thankfully his new students actually understood the importance of being on time, already a drastic improvement from last year's class. His eyes fell upon his students, watched as several students did various degrees of nervous tics, some rubbed their arms or necks, others rubbed their fingers. Finally the man saw his resident problem child, the boy's green hair ruffled in the wind, his bright red eyes. Wait, red? They were blue inside of the classroom. The man chalked it up to a side effect from his quirk. No, what really caught his eye were the scars that littered his forearms. Interesting. Today you will be performing the same tests you all did in middle and high school.
The underground hero began, deciding to focus on Problem Child's infallible quirk registry later. The only difference being you will be allowed to use your quirks.
The HPSC believes that's very one should all have the same baseline, but they're illogical.
If we don't allow you to truly give it your all, then we have all failed as teachers. It's our job to know your limits, and push you to overcome them, plus ultra. The tired man said, grabbing a baseball from the bin he had beside him. Wait, sir, what about orientation? A girl with brown hair and blush marks said. We at UA believe in a more relaxed school program, that doesn't just apply to the students. Aizawa said, shutting the girl up.
Hamato. You scored first place on the entrance exam. Step forward. The man commanded, watching as the green teen walked up to the hobo-looking man. Sir? The boy politely asked, an eyebrow raised to ask what he was doing. What was your highest ball through in high school? Aizawa asked, tossing the ball to Hamato. Around 85 meters, I think. Hamato answered, his fingers tracing against the stitching that the ball held.
Not bad a score. This time use your quirk. The tired hobo man said, stepping aside as he pointed to a white circle that Hamato was currently standing in. Stay in the circle, besides that no limits. The underground hero said as he grabbed a device from who knows where. Problem Child offered a smile as he placed his hands behind his back, pulling out a pair of sais as he twirled them, only to smash his fists together as red energy began to cover his arms. The red energy trailed up his entire body, coating him in the same energy as he grew in size as well, going to just below 7 feet tall. The boy threw his arm back, his arm pulsed rapidly as it began to spark with red lightning, before growing rapidly in size as the boy shifted his body weight forward, launching his arm as he yelled at the top of his lungs. Hot Suup! Hamato yelled, the ball leaving his enlarged hand as it soared through he clouds with a sonic boom from behind it.
Hamato looked at his homeroom teacher with a smile, his red energy form disappearing in almost an instant, dropping down to the ground as he waited for his results.
Aizawa held the device, his eyes watching as the counters continued to climb higher and higher until it finally stopped. You all need to know what your current limitations are. Today will be the baseline for how strong your potential as future heroes are. So give it all, Aizawa said, turning around Tay device to show the students the score of his problem child. 1,478 meters. The class collectively yelled at the same time, a small purple-haired boy even passed out from pure shock. Dude, that's insane, a black-haired teen with oddly shaped elbows said as he got over his shock. Wait, you're the guy that stopped the rampaging zero-pointer. A pair of floating clothes said, probably pointing at the green-haired teen who just rubbed the back of his neck slightly. Yeah, Problem Child said as he joined his classmates. We get to use our quirks however we want. A red-haired student said, most probably didn't hear the invisible girl's observation, not that it really mattered. Oh man, this is gonna be so fun. The pink girl shouted with joy. Shota's face immediately darkened at her words, turning around with a deadly aura as he flared his quirk once more. Fun. You believe being a hero is all fun and games. The hero said, looking over his students with his red eyes until he finally released his quirk. Let's see if this is still fun. The person who comes last in the quirk assessment test will be deemed with no potential and will immediately be expelled from the hero course. The tired hero said, counting down in his head until his students would shout. And in 3, 2. What? You can't do that. He can't do that, can he? Both the pink-skinned and invisible girl said. Ah, there was the reaction Aizawa waited for. Why you can't do that? It's our first day. That's not fair at all. We all worked hard to get here. The girl with permanent blush marks said, making her opinion known. The underground hero smiled slightly. Natural disasters, selfish villains, know the world is a cruel and unforgiving place. The sooner you learn this fact, the bigger of a chance you might actually become a hero. The man said, grinning to himself as he lit a fire underneath his students. You all only have 3 years to learn everything to being a hero. Welcome to UA, the man said, a creepy smile on his face. The first test was the 50-meter dash. Aizawa stood at the finish line, right beside the digital clock that would record each student's time. The first 2 up was the stiff boy with glasses and blue hair, and a girl with an obvious mutation quirk. The boy got into a professional running pose as fire began to spark from the exhausts in his legs. Meanwhile, the girl got into a crouched position as they both waited for the man to start the race. With a loud bang, the 2 students launched forward, the boy crossing the 50 meters in 2.87 seconds. Tenya Iida, quirk. Engine. A mutation-type quirk that gives him literal engines on his calves, allowing him to reach insane speeds that not many people could match. It's too short of a runway. I could barely reach 3rd gear. Iida said, coming to a stop as he looked at his time. Impressive time, but currently he's in his element. His true test will come soon though. The man mused to himself as the girl jumped high into the air, landing in another crouch position only to repeat her earlier action, earning herself a time of 5.32 seconds. Suyu Asui, quirk. Frog. A mutation type that gives her the attributes of a frog. It's as simple as that. Alright, next group is up. Aizawa said, watching as the next pair of students came up and got into position. A girl with horns and a very flamboyant blonde boy with a unique belt got into position. My apologies, mon aim, but I do believe this race is mine. The flamboyant boy said in a French accent, which the hero would admit confused him as none of his students were French. The pink girl offered a confident smile as she got down low, and the boy turned around, his back facing the finish line. The moment Aizawa began to race, the blonde jumped into the air, a brilliant beam of light shooting out of his belt. Yuga Aoyama, quirk. Naval laser. An emitter type that gives this French boy the ability to fire off a beam of pure sparkles at his opponents, leaving only a pile of glitter behind in his wake. I really shouldn't have let Mike write out the students' quirks. Aizawa grumbled to himself as he saw the flamboyant boy jump up into the air, only for his beam to shut off mid-flight, causing him to fall to the ground. Meanwhile, the pink girl ran forward, creating some type of whitish liquid from her hands that she was able to scare on, passing past her opponent as he got up and fired another laser into the air. Mina Ashido, quirk. Acid. A mutation and emitter hybrid type quirk. Her skin is naturally resistant to the acid she can create from anywhere on her body. She's also a killer dancer. Mina crossed the line in just over 5 seconds, while it took Yuga a solid 6 before he finally crossed. Alas, my Mon-effect quirk has the downside of being too marvelous. So I can't use my quirk for more than a second without gaining a tummy ache. The blonde boy said as he held onto his stomach. The next few tests were the usual, students giving their best as they ran. Now a girl with brown hair was roughing her clothes as her fingertips glowed pink. All lightening my clothes, oh, and my shoes too. The girl said as he bent over and tapped her shoes. Ochako Uraraka, quirk. Zero gravity. An emitter quirk that can literally give her control of the greatest natural force in Tay world. Gravity. Upon placing her 5 fingers on any surface, she can negate gravity entirely. Uraraka crossed the line in just over 7 seconds, a wide smile on her face as she pressed her fingertips of her fingers together, returning gravity back to normal. The next test takers didn't do anything special in Aizawa's opinion, and up next was the problem child himself. With a confident smile on his face, Hamato stood tall, his eyes shining blue as a pair of twin katanas appeared in his hands. He got into a crouched position as his friend Shinso got into a runner's pose. At the sound of the bang, Hamato swung forward, spinning himself into a forward side flip as he threw his katana through the air. His movements were precise and flawless. The flying sword was spinning vertically as it glowed a bright blue, only to suddenly flash as Hamato now held onto the flying blade, teleporting to where his sword had now crossed the line, earning him the time of 2.89 seconds, less than 2/100ths of a second slower than Iida. Yanaki Hamato, Quirk. Weapon Summon. While it might not look like it, his quirk is mutation and emitter hybrid. His arms and legs have stripes that allow him to channel energy into making different weapons. Hamato stuck the landing, standing tall as he rested one of his katanas on his shoulders as he turned around, watching as Shinso ran through the 50-meter dash with some effort, racking up a time of 7.34 seconds. See why it's important to train Hermano? Hamato asked towards the purple boy, getting a groan in return as Shinso panted as he tried to catch his breath. Soon enough the final group stood at the starting line. The boy with weird elbows and a boy with large lips. Stuffing a cupcake into his mouth, the larger boy sprung forward, his steps cracking the ground as he rushed forward. Meanwhile the black-haired boy jumped high into the air, bending his elbow as his hand went past his face, a line of tape shooting from his elbows as they stuck to the ground in front of him. Rikido Sato, Quirk. Sugar Rush, an emitter quirk that gives him super strength after he eats sugar. The more sugar he eats the stronger he gets, but he also loses intelligence the stronger he is. Hinata Zero, Quirk. Tape, a mutation quirk that gives him literal tape dispensers for elbows. He's out very own knock-off Spider-Man when he uses his tape to swing around.
Zero pulled the tape back into his body as he sprung forward, just managing to cross the finish line before the sugar boy.
The two stood proud as they smiled at each other, giving a sportsman handshake as they joined the group. The next test was the grip strength, which not surprisingly a few did well, while others fell behind like the small midget with balls for hair. The top 3 who did the best was a boy with multiple arms, a girl with a black ponytail and not surprisingly Hamato who managed to just shatter the device with his red energy. Mezzo Shoji, Quirk. Dupli Arms, a mutation quirk that gives him multiple limbs. Each limb can be modified to have any appendage at the end of it as well, including eyes, ears and mouths as well. He also has a base boost of strength.
The next test was the long jump, with Asui doing quite well, being able to jump over the entire distance without much trouble. Another who did well was the girl who had the spiked ponytail, somehow having a javelin as she ran and literally pole jumped over the entire sandpit. The only other person to completely clear the jump was Hamato, not much of a surprise to the homeroom teacher. Next was the push-ups. After about 10 minutes only a few students were still in the fight. To no one's surprise Hamato was still doing push-ups, looking like he could go for another 10 minutes and still not feel a thing. Another was the redhead with sharp teeth from earlier. The only other person who was matching their lace was a two-toned boy with a burn scar who was matching Hamato's impressive pace. Eventually the other two fell down, leaving Hamato the last person standing in the push-ups. The next test was the side-to-side, where most everyone had a good score. The only person who had a truly remarkable score was a purple midget who was giving the girls concerning looks.
Aizawa made a mental look to keep a close look on this boy. In the corner of his eyes, Aizawa saw Hamato talking to Shinso about something. The only thing the tired hero was able to make out was about using his quirk. The underground hero narrowed his eyes. It was true that he had yet to see the tired teen use his quirk, which did nothing but give the man suspicions as to why. Minoru Mineta, Quirk. Pop-off, an emitter quirk that gives this little midget the power to use his balls in combat. Wait. Nimori, don't clip that.
The next test was the distance run. Most didn't make it more than 10 minutes before dropping to the ground, making the underground hero sigh in frustration. Did none of his students out any effort in making sure their bodies could hold up out in the field? The sound of an engine revving snapped the man out of his thoughts, watching as the pony-tailed girl was riding a literal moped around the track. Aizawa blinked, and then he blinked again, reading her file as to what the heck just happened.
Momo Yaoyorozu, Quirk. Creation. Armed with an emitter-type quirk, this princess has the ability to use the lipids in her body to make anything so long as she knows the chemical makeup of said item. The next test was the ball throw, and since Problem Child already threw the ball, he was the only one who didn't participate in this with everyone else. His score of 1,478 meters, so far was only broken by two others, Uraraka who sent the ball into space, earning a score of infinity, and Yaoyorozu who made a literal cannon and sent the ball over 2 kilometers. And now the purple-haired teen who most definitely was not related to Aizawa in any fashion was up on the hull throw. "Alright man, you got this. Just make sure to scream at the top of your lungs ho," Hamato said, rubbing the other teen's shoulders as he gave him some kind of support. At least that's what the underground hero thought. "Nope, not doing that," Shinso said, cutting the boy off from another one of his idiotic ideas. Finally the boy stepped up into the circle, ball in hand as he stared at it almost as if it weighed 1,000,000 pounds. There were so many ways he could use his quirk right now. He could have the brown-haired girl send the thing to space like she did earlier, or have the rich girl blast it out of a cannon. "Sir, all quirk USEAGE is allowed so long as I am in the circle, right?" Shinso asked, looking at his homeroom teacher, Eraserhead, his thumb feeling the stitch work on the ball as he waited for the confirmation. The tired scruffy man nodded, a small smirk hidden behind his scarf that was totally not a capture weapon. "Hey Hamato, can I ask you a question?" Shinso called out, turning around to see the green-haired student that had managed to become his friend in a single morning. "You, Hamato began to say, his red eyes clouding over as his body stiffened as he stood like a statue. "Do me a favor and throw this ball as far as you can," Shinso said, tossing the ball to the Problem Child. To everyone's surprise, he summoned his swords, swiping it down and a small blue portal formed in front of him. Winding up, Hamato threw the ball into the portal, a beeping noise being heard from Aizawa, a device as a full-blown smile formed on his face, turning it around to show the class. 1083000 meters. Shinso stared at the score on the machine, glancing between the device and currently mined. "Wait, what?" Hamato's eyes were back to their normal blue as he was clapping slowly at Shinso, a proud smirk on his face as his swords were somehow strapped to his back. The indigo teen continued to stare at the boy for more than a few moments. He never released his quirk, so that meant that Hamato had broken free of his quirk on his own. Hitoshi Shinso, quirk. Brainwash, an emitter quirk that gives him the ability to completely control anyone who responds to a question he asks. "Are you sure he isn't you secret child Zawa? He even has the same eye bags as you." Aizawa groaned at the boy's file. Yet again he was questioning why he let his overenthusiastic friend write the summaries for all of his students. Meanwhile, a rat man was rubbing his head, looking at the ball that struck him in the head just moments before. The rat then started to chuckle, knowing that his student would never see his revenge coming. The following tests were the seated toe touch and sit-ups. Finally, after all the results were compiled, the man stood before his class, projecting the scores to his students. "It's illogical to go over everyone's individual scores, instead I'm showing you all of them at once," Aizawa said as he showed his students the results. A few sighed in relief knowing they wouldn't be going home, a few were angry that they were going home, and then there were the sobs. A floating pile of clothes were currently sniffling. This was no doubt the last place. Toru Hagakuri, quirk. Invisibility. A mutation quirk that makes her skin ignore the sun's rays, making her completely invisible to the eyes. Right when Aizawa was about to say something, he saw Problem Child doing his best to comfort her, saying she tried her best and to take comfort knowing she gave her best. The underground's hero's eyes narrowed dangerously, his hand tightening around his scarf. This boy was a conundrum on so many levels, and perhaps it was time to finally give him a true test. Without another thought, he shot his capture scarf forward. His eyes went wide as Hamato whipped his head around, and caught the gray fabric in his hand, looking at the underground hero with narrowed eyes. What happened next was almost a blur to the man. To say that he was having fun would be an understatement. This whole test was the perfect time for Izuku to understand his classmates' quirks, an old hobby he had long before he was taken, analyzing quirks to their fullest potential. That's how he managed to deduce that Shinso's activation requirement for his quirk was a verbal response, whether that was actual words or if any noise counted had yet to be tested. When he fell under his friend's control, and teleported the ball to the farthest location he could, dread filled his stomach. Not from the quirk itself, but because there was a likely chance that he has hit his sensei with a baseball. Then the tests ended, and he managed to score first, which honestly surprised him to an extent. Sure, he was usually in the top 3 for each test, still he hasn't expected to beat out the girl who could literally make anything form her body. And then he heard the sniffles coming from his right, a pile of floating clothes shivering as he could faintly make out tears hitting the ground. Gently he placed a hand on her shoulder, doing his best to try and comfort the invisible girl. "Hey, chin up, you did your best," he softly began, his usual bravado and confident smirk disappearing from his face as he spoke. "I mean, you gave it your all right, so there's no reason to cry. If they can't see that you went beyond, then they don't deserve you," Izuku said, stopping the girl's sniffles as she, probably, looked at him, and hopefully, small smile on her face as she heard his words. Then, almost like a flip had been switched, Izuku's comforting smile disappeared as the hairs on his neck stood straight up. A memory coming to him in the split second. You have power, but power means nothing if you're not constantly aware of the dangers around you. A mutant said, wearing a robe and had a walking stick in hand, his other hand playing with the whiskers on his face. Okay, but how does that explain why I'm in my boxers, standing on a box with a blindfold in my hands? A much younger Izuku asked, confused at his master's words as he gripped the soft fabric of the blindfold. There is something that not many people know of, a skill that is only earned through months, sometimes even years of hard work. You must heighten your senses to the point where even the slightest change in wind can alert you to an unexpected attack. The rat man said, walking circles around the boy, his cane tapping against the wooden floor as he examined his pupil. Okay, but if I'll be able to sense the change in wind, how am I supposed to tell the difference between a threat and just a breeze hit me? The boy asked, he's staring with his sensei as shifted his body to move in a small circle. The rat smiled, stopping as he looked at his pupil. You'll learn the difference. Now, place the blindfold over your eyes, and try to anticipate the attacks from my sons. The rat man said, shadowy figures of 4 large beings coming into view, keeping their appearance hidden as each held a suddenly ranged weapon in their hands. Grumbling slightly, Izuku tied the blindfold over his eyes. Getting into a ready stance, he waited for the first attack to come. Hajime, the rat said, banging his cane against the floor as Izuku immediately felt a rubber pain hitting his cheek as he was knocked off the box. Instinctively, Izuku shot his hand up and blocked a strange-looking fabric that was flying through the air, aimed directly at his head. Without waiting a moment, the boy spun his wrist in a circular motion, getting a hold on the odd material, and pulled with all his might. Feeling the familiar weight of a body moving from his tug, Izuku ducked down low as the body came flying through the air, his instincts stopping him from realizing this was his teach and not some threat. Izuku's eyes widened as he realized who he just attacked, pulling his fist back just in time before he cracked the hero's jaw. No one spoke a word as the teacher looked slightly shocked at his students' actions. All the students looked on as one fell over and passed out. Meanwhile, Kaminari was dumbly blinking, his brain trying to catch up to the events that just transpired. Sorry, Izuku dumbly offered, his fist still in the air as he didn't dare to move from his teacher's gaze. Aizawa stood up, looking at the boy who was still doing his interpretation of the Statue of Liberty. If I don't move, he can't see me, the boy thought to himself, a cold sweat running down his face as the man looked at him with anger just beneath the surface. Faster than the eye could see, Izuku was suddenly wrapped up in strange fabric from before, his entire body off the ground and wrapped up besides his head. I'll admit, I wasn't expecting that, the man said, flaring his quirk as his long hair began to float, his eyes turning blood red as Izuku immediately began to think maybe he really was Doon possessed. Originally he dismissed the idea that Kamimari said after first seeing the man's quirk, now he was reconsidering his thoughts. You told her that she went beyond. The man said, gesturing to the invisible girl, blinking as his hair fell and stared right into the boy's soul. So why didn't you? The man asked, commanded. His voice held no room for debate or discussion. He wanted an answer, and he would get an answer. Izuku smirked slightly, going against his restraints as his muscles bulged. Why should I let someone like you stay, when you didn't even give it you all? Why should I let someone like you stay in the hero course? The man asked, his grip on his capture weapon tightening as he noticed the boy beginning to struggle against the capture weapon. Izuku's eyes flashed red as he tried to summon his quirk, immediately noticing that Eraserhead activated his quirk, stopping the boy in his tracks. Shota Aizawa, Pro Hero. Eraserhead, Quirk. Eraser. An emitter quirk that lets my best bud eraser all non-mutation quirks in his field of vision. The effect stops when he blinks though. Izuku's eyes widened when he couldn't feel his quirk anymore, his now bright emerald green eyes narrowing as he restrained against his teacher's capture scarf. He was about to speak when the man cut him to it. Allow me to be clear. I believe you have some potential buried inside of you. I want to see it. So I'll make this as simple as possible. Impress me. The man said, using his free hand to pull up his yellow goggles, waiting for his problem child to do something.
A spark was lit inside the emerald eyes of his problem child. That's what he was hoping for.
In an instant the man felt the fabric begin to give away at the boy's impressive strength, a small hole forming around the boy's wrist, and that's exactly what he was hoping for. In a flash a small metal star was between his fingers, flicking them forward. Izuku shot the ninja star through the air. Aizawa's eyes widened slightly at the attack, his grip over Izuku loosening just enough for the boy to free himself, flipping backwards as the man blocked the throwing star from hitting his goggles. The metal star fell to the floor as Eraserhead immediately realized that he was duped. In an instant he lunged forward, his hair floating as he saw the boy trying to summon one of his weapons. Flinging his scarf forward, he aimed his capture device at the boy's ankles, missing them barely as Izuku spun midair, only to land in a crouched position and leap backwards once more when he saw his teacher shifting his body momentum and aimed a punch to the boy's face. Raising his left arm he managed to block the hit, pushing forward he managed to reel his fist backwards as he attempted to land a blow on the underground hero. His attack missed as the man merely strained his neck to the right, his hand grabbing a hold of the boy's wrist, hitting a nerve as Izuku muffled a small wince. Bringing his knee up, Izuku managed to land a blow in the man's chest, forcing him to loosen his grip, and Izuku pulled his fist back, noticing that the man's hair fell the moment he hit him in the chest. He needed space, and that was exactly what Eraserhead wasn't giving him. Performing another backflip, he felt something wrap around his ankle, slamming him into the ground. I expected more from you, Eraserhead said, watching as the boy twisted his ankle in a certain way that allowed him to free himself. Rolling forward he launched himself up to his feet, getting into a fighter's position, his hands raised to protect his head. Green eyes narrowed dangerously as a small red spark between his fingertips. You haven't seen anything yet. The boy gritted, a fire burning in his eyes as he lunged forward. The man flared up his quirk, his hair floating once more as the sparks disappeared. Izuku smirked as he figured out the man's tells. Deciding he couldn't be put on the defensive any longer, he rushed forward, looking like a blur to most as he approached the underground hero. He propelled himself into the air, going into an overhead flip as he kicked his right leg out, coming down at a vertical angle with his heel aimed directly for the man's head. Of course this attack was obvious, and normally it would be an easy dodge. What made it difficult for the man was the speed he was giving it at, rivaling even the pro hero Merca's speed. Eraserhead managed to flip his body to the right, his feet barely landing as he sent out his capture scarf once more, narrowly missing the teen as he landed in a crouched position. Aizawa's eyes began to dry, forcing himself to blink, and that was all Izuku was waiting for. Without waiting even a microsecond, his eyes turned red and his finger sparked, say now spinning in his hands as he crashed his knuckles together. The red energy began to trail up his arm like they did before, only this time they stopped halfway up as Izuku managed to land an uppercut into the man's chest before he could neutralize his quirk again. Aizawa skidded on his heels as he managed to pull his hands up and block most of the impact. That didn't mean his hands didn't hurt like hell though. Izuku felt his power shut off once more as his teacher stood tall, his yellow goggles flashing with red as he stared down the boy, his mouth being completely hidden from the boy, otherwise he would have seen the creepy smile beginning to form on his lips. In a moment the capture scarf flung forward. Eraserhead movements were much faster this time, lunging forward as he began to swing two separate lines of fabric at the boy. Going into a handstand, before pushing upwards as he began to continuously flip as he managed to throw several ninja stars, each aimed directly at the man's goggles. With the flying pieces of fabric no longer a problem, the team landed in another crouch position, his right hand back as he suddenly held another throwing star. Aizawa managed to blow all the incoming projectiles, barely seeing as his student stood tall and began to run just out of his scarf's reach. The single throwing star in his hand somehow duplicating as he flicked his entire hand downwards, now holding 3 stars as he jumped upwards, fling all of his weapons at the man. This forced him to blink once more, deflecting all of the incoming projectiles as he tried to make sure the boy was constantly in his field of vision. Seeing him summon his sword, Aizawa immediately knew that he couldn't allow him to continue any further. Activating Eraser once more, effectively stopping the boy's plan whatever it was, little did he know this was exactly what he wanted to happen. Flipping forward he shot another throwing star at the man. This trick was starting to get annoying. Meanwhile, the forgotten students just dumbly watched. A stoic boy with two-toned hair looking on with indifference, except for the small amount of curiosity in his dual-colored eyes. Other watched on with awe. The small midget who passed out earlier promptly passed out again when he saw the green-haired teen doing a flip over the man, smacking their teacher on the back of head. The intellectual girl looked on with curiosity. She had been trained in martial arts from a very young age, and yet she was unfamiliar with this form of martial arts. The blonde boy with a tail watched with wide eyes, while Yaoyorozu didn't recognize the form of combat, the tailed boy did. While everyone else was watching with either interest or awe, Kamimari whispered to Shinso, trying to not draw attention to himself or the indigo teen. "So, I heard him say you were his apprentice earlier," the electric blonde said, beginning the conversation as Shinso just nodded slightly. Do you think he might train me too?" Kamimari asked, a hopeful tone in his voice as he watched the ninja boy dodge blow after blow from the underground hero. Shinso just shrugged, not daring to peel his eyes away from the scene. Skidding to a stop, Izuku noticed different things about his homeroom teacher. 1. His quirk was some time-based counter, the second being after a distraction or blow to the head or chest stopped his quirk. The final thing he noticed, and arguably the most important, the time his quirk was active was decreasing each time he used it. 12 seconds. Izuku muttered to himself, watching as the hair fell down, his eyes shining blue as he attempted to summon his katanas. Feeling the power fleeing his body, he did a series of flips and dodges, leading into a cartwheel as he managed to escape the man's capture weapon. 10 seconds, he quietly said, smirking to himself as he fired up his quirk, only to feel his power disappear before he could even feel the hilt of his blades. 7 seconds. The boy said aloud, surprising the hero as he dodged a flying kick by the boy. His eyes were currently burning, the eye drops in his back pocket feeling particularly inviting. He needed space, and he needed it now. Izuku saw this and immediately began to continually throw more and more metal stars at the man. He couldn't let up now, well until he ran out, that is. His green eyes widened as he reached for another projectile only to realize he was out. A small amount of panic leaked into the boy's face, and that was all the hero needed. Shooting his capture weapon out, he forced the boy to roll back and get a large distance between the two of them. Smiling, Aizawa swiftly pulled out the small green bottle he kept in his back pocket. Pulling his goggles down as he kept one eye on the boy, the small bottle held the man's key to victory. His black eyes widened as he saw in slow motion another metal star hit the green bottle, flinging the bottle from his grasp. Damn it, I took my eyes off of him for a split second. The man rationalized. The bottle clanged to the floor and all its contents spilled onto the hard dirt beside the man's combat boots. Izuku smiled as his arm was still out in the throwing motion, his eyes glowing bright blue as a katana formed in his hand. In a flash the boy disappeared, only to reappear behind the underground hero, a wide smile on his face as he stuck the man with the hilt of his blade. Eraserhead stumbled back slightly, his eyes were burning already, he was nearly at his limit, he estimated he had maybe 1, possibly 2 more eraser activates before his quirk would be ineffective. Flaring up his quirk he barely saw the blue blip in the corner of his eyes. Izuku's eyes turned back to green as he flipped midair, kicking the man in the shoulder. Instinctively he grabbed the shoulder, feeling a sharp pain for a brief moment before twisting his body, managing to land a sold kick on the boy's chest, flinging him backwards. The green teen's eyes fired up red, the image of Sei forming as he fell back fist to the hard dirt. Pounding his left fist against the ground, his red energy encased his arms up to his elbows, flipping upwards he shot forward. Eraserhead managed to sidesweep the boy, sending him to the ground once more, seeing him slam his right arm to the ground as the energy began to encase his right arm too. Activating Eraser for quiet possibility the last time for this fight, he erased the boy's quirk for less than 2 seconds, not that it mattered. As soon as he noticed the power gone from his arms, he felt a force hit his lower legs. Feeling his legs give he fell to the floor. Looking up he saw his problem child looking down at him, katana aimed directly at his thought as he breathed heavily. His eyes shined like a raging fire, glaring at the man try and get up. For the first time in a long time, Aizawa genuinely smiled at someone besides his close friends or wife. This kid, Aizawa thought, looking at the teen who made his sword disappear as he offered a hand to the fallen crow hero. The underground crow took the offered hand, standing tall as he looked at his problem child. Not bad kid, maybe next time I won't hold back, the man said, getting back into his normal stance of indifference, yet behind his attitude, the man felt proud of this kid. He wasn't holding back, not at the end, this truly was a fight he lost. Oh, and no one's going home. That was just a rational deception to ensure you all did your best. Aizawa exclaimed, watching as several students held in surprise. Yaoyorozu telling everyone that it was obvious he wasn't going to expel anyone. The underground hero continued to glance at Hamato, he knew it's the proper guidance, he would become a proper hero. From behind a corner, the large build of All Might, Japan's #1 hero could be seen. A look of surprise came over him as he did his best to stay hidden. To his surprise young Hamato turned around and saluted him, while also not alerting his classmates to the hero's presence. It was now several hours later, and the thin frail version of All Might sat in front of the overlord of Ua, the one and only Nezu, who drove fear into the hearts of many with his fluffy paws. The small rodent looked on at the #1 hero with his black beady eyes, a small smile on his face as he held onto a file that he managed to get. I've looked into Hamato's files like you asked, although I believe you won't be too happy with what I found. The mouse bear dog thing said with a smile, sliding over the file to the frail hero. Picking up the file, Toshinori quickly flipped through the contents. Nothing was out of the usual, in fact it seemed perfect. I don't understand, the man began, looking at his new boss with a hint of confusion evident in his voice. You said there was something that you wanted to show me, but I've already seen this, as well as all their other teachers in Ua. All Might said, still flipping through the few pages on the boy. Nezu smiled. Exactly, it looks perfect, no hint of tampering being found anywhere, except for one small detail. The principal of UA said as he pointed his adorable paw to a small section on the boy's file. Toshinori's blue eyes wide when he looked at the information. A small detail that was easily meant nothing anyone who would have read it, well anyone except for Nezu and All Might that is. That's not possible, All Might said, looking at his rodent boss. The mouse overlord didn't speak, instead grabbing the file back, laying it down in front of his as he looked at the one piece of information that didn't add up with everything else. The small section that showed the transcripts of him moving from Japan to the United States, a few years before All Might and All for One had their final battle. Moved to America with his father after his mother died. Nezu said aloud, reading over the file once more. I checked all missing person reports from that time. None of the reports matched the boy's description were filed, so either his father was working with All for One. Nezu began. Or there is so much more information that isn't accurate in his file. All Might finished, already knowing what his boss would say. Nodding, Nezu closed the folder, and cupped his paws together. I'll be honest, All Might. I don't believe that his father was an associate with All for One. My current theory is that Yanaki Hamato is hiding secrets more than even I could properly estimate. Nezu finished, looking at his skeleton of a friend. The man nodded, looking down at the closed file, the boy's name printed boldly on the front. Then what do we do now? All Might asked, looking up into the beady black eyes of the principal. Nezu hummed, sipping on some tea as he grabbed the file, putting it in his personal drawer as he sat his cup down. For now, we keep this between ourselves, the less people who know about this the better. The mouse bear dog said, looking at the hero with steady eyes. All Might nodded, standing up as he began to head towards the door. Oh, and All Might, Nezu happily said, gaining the hero's attention. I don't believe he's a threat to our school, I know you already have your eye on him. Nezu said, referring the All Might's true reason for getting a job at UA. I'll keep that in mind, sir. The frail man said, closing the wooden door behind him as Nezu was left alone to his thoughts. What all are you hiding? Nezu asked himself, pulling out a pen as he began to write something down on a piece of paper. The rodent smiled to himself, he hasn't had a proper challenge in investigation like this in a very, very long time. Meanwhile, 3 teens were walking down the hallway. Dude, please. You've gotta teach me how to flip like that, Kamimari begged, jumping around Hamato who had his signature smile on his face, bag slung across his back. Shinso rolled his eyes at the blonde's antics, even if he was secretly wanting for the same thing. We'll see, Hamato said, looking at the clock and began to walk towards the school gym. I asked Aizawa-sensei if we could use the school gym, so we're all good. The green teen said as he glanced at the clock.
As if a switch had been flipped, Shinso groaned, remembering the promise Hamato made him earlier in the day.
What's the matter? You said you weren't attached to feeling your arms this morning, Hamato said, leaning forward as he looked at the face of his newest friends. His eyes widened slightly as he felt the vibrations coming from his phone in his pocket. Hey, I just realized I forgot something back in our classroom, you guys go ahead, I'll meet you there. The freckled boy said, already taking a step back as his newest friends began to walk towards the gym. Sighing slightly, Izuku stepped into an empty hallway, fishing out his phone that had an intricate design, almost looking like a turtle shell. Seeing the person ID, Izuku didn't waste another second as he pulled the phone to his ear. Hello, Izuku asked, his eyes narrowing as he heard the caller speak. We found the girl. The hard blue waves violently crashed against the warm sand, the piles of trash glinting dangerously in the light, and for some reason 2 teenagers were wrestling in the trash-ridden beach. A boy with dark purple hair had his arms raised in the protective stance, preparing himself for the oncoming attack. In the blink of the eye, a green blur successfully flipped the boy, his back crashing against the hard sand as he looked up at his assailant. His smirk was plastered on his face as he offered a hand to the fallen boy, pulling the electric blonde up and he patted his back, before taking a few steps back. Thought you said you were gonna block that one. The green missile asked, his green eyes swinging with amusement as he planted his right foot back, and gestured his hands in a taunting motion. Gritting his teeth, the boy ran forward, his palms up as he wildly swung at the green boy. Yeah well, I didn't realize you'd go Bruce Lee on me. He called out, missing his attack once again as his opponent flipped backward, landing expertly. So I'm as good as Bruce? The other boy confidently asked, leaping up as he flipped over the electricity user entirely. Landing into a slide, the green missile jumped up, flipping sideways as he showed off. His red eyes narrowed dangerously as he landed, his vision zeroing in on the apparent weakness that the blonde had. Whiting his body to the left, he dodged another futile lung, the boy's arm clearly open as he took this opportunity. Grabbing him by the wrist, he twisted, enlisting a small yell of pain before placing his other arm around his waist to stabilize the movement, and then he pulled. What the he-ah, the indigo teen yelled, feeling something hard hit his chest. His arm felt like it was being ripped out of its socket as he suddenly felt gravity leave his body. Time seemed to slow as his brown eyes glanced around the area, watching as his friend proceeded to judo flip him completely. A sharp gasp escaped his lips, oxygen suddenly deciding that the boy's lungs were a safety hazard as they quickly evacuated, leaving him gasping for breath. His eyes were wide as he planted for breath. Looking up, all he saw was the form of something green who had a smile on his face. Over to their right, a boy with blonde hair and a black lightning bolt design on his left side was watching the whole scene, his lips curved upwards as he watched. His legs were crossed as he sat on top of a ruined refrigerator. In his hand was a juice box as he loudly sipped the juice from the small box. "That's 10.0 inches," the boy helpfully commented, counting on his fingers numbly as he placed the box beside him as the collapsed boy refused to move. "Is he dead?" the electric teen asked, a hint of amusement in his voice as he looked down at the boy whose soul was leaving his body. Without warning, the green-haired boy lightly kicked the fallen boy, hearing a groan before the tired teen rolled to his side, shielding his side from the next kick. "He's all good," the boy who immobilized the collapsed boy yelled out, offering his hand once more. This time Purple Eyes stared at the hand for a long moment before signing heavily, taking the offered hand. "How did you do that?" he asked, his breathing now closer to normal as he glanced at the tired boy perched on top of the abandoned appliance. "Flipped you," the greenette said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world as he patted the back of the other back. "So, are you gonna teach me how to do moves like that, or am I here just to eat sand?" the boy with gravity-defying purple hair asked, getting tired of being knocked down to the sand after nearly a dozen times. "I mean, sand is quite full of nutrients," the boy quickly shot back, raising his hands in surrender as he got a stink look. "Okay, what do you want to know first?"